My story doesn't start in the shadows. It starts in the light, under the dazzling, colorful glare of the big top. My world was the air, the feel of rough bar grip tape in my hands, and the smell of sawdust and popcorn. I was Richard Grayson, but to the world I was the Flying Grayson, the youngest of the famous trapeze act. My parents were John and Mary Grayson, and they were more than just my family. They were my partners. We moved as one, a single entity, defying gravity with a smile. Gotham City was just another stop on the circuit, a sprawling Gothic monster of a city that seemed to suck the light from the sky. But under the circus tent, none of that mattered. We created our own light. I remember the weightlessness of the final swing, the moment of release, the silent, breathless flight between platforms. My father's strong, sure hands were always there to catch me. I never, ever doubted they would be. That night, the Haley's circus tent was packed. I remember the heat of the spotlights, the roar of the crowd, a distant ocean. We were about to perform our signature quadruple somersault, a move no one else in the world could do. I was on the platform waiting for my cue when I saw them. Two men talking to the owner, Mr. Haley. One was slick, wearing an expensive suit that looked out of place. The other was a hulking brute. I didn't think much of it. Then the music swelled and we took our positions. The flight was perfect. I soared, tumbling through the air, the world a beautiful blur. I stretched out my hands for my father's catch. It never came. I heard the sickening twang of ropes snapping. I saw the horror in his eyes a split second before he fell. My mother followed. The silence after the thud was louder than any crowd's roar. I was hanging there, alone, the world crumbling beneath me. The light was gone, forever. I was numb. The world had become a silent, grey film. I was placed in a sterile office at the circus, a social worker speaking words that didn't penetrate the fog. Orphanage, procedures, I'm so sorry. They were just sounds. All I could see was the fall, over and over again. The door opened, and a man walked in. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and his presence seemed to suck the air from the room. He had a stern, almost sad face, but his eyes held a depth of pain I recognized instantly. It was a reflection of my own. This was Bruce Wayne. I knew the name, of course. Billionaire, playboy, philanthropist. He knelt down, his voice low and calm, cutting through my shock. I saw what happened to your parents, Dick. It wasn't an accident. Those words were a jolt of lightning. My head snapped up. I'm going to make sure the person responsible is brought to justice, he said, and I'm going to offer you a choice. You can go into the system or you can come with me. He wasn't offering pity. He was offering a path. Something in his gaze, a shared understanding of loss, made my decision. I took his hand. He didn't take me to a mansion that felt like a museum. He took me to a study, offered me a glass of milk I didn't touch, and introduced me to his butler, Alfred. Alfred had kind eyes and a quiet strength that was immediately comforting. That night, lying in a bed larger than my entire trailer, I couldn't sleep. The image of the falling ropes haunted me. Bruce's words echoed. It wasn't an accident. A new, cold feeling began to push aside the grief, anger, and a desperate burning need for answers. The days that followed were a strange blur. Wayne Manor was a cavernous, echoing place, full of history and shadows. Alfred was my anchor, his gentle British demeanor a constant reassurance. Bruce was often absent, distant. I knew he was investigating my parents' death, but he shared very little. I felt like a ghost wandering the halls. The anger inside me was a caged animal. I started training in secret. The manor had a gym and I used it, pushing my body to its limits, trying to recapture the strength and agility I had in the air. But it was earthbound, clumsy. The grace was gone. One night, unable to sleep, I wandered down to the main study. I found a hidden panel behind a bookcase. My circus-honed curiosity took over. I slipped through and found a descending staircase that led into the earth. The air grew cold. At the bottom was a cavern, vast and incredible. Gleaming vehicles, computer banks, and a display case with a black suit and cowl. The Batcave. It all clicked into place. Bruce Wayne was Batman. I wasn't scared. I was awestruck. This was the path. This was the answer to the pain. Bruce found me there moments later. He wasn't angry, just resigned. "This is my war, Dick," he said. "It's not for you." "They were my parents," I shouted, the dam of my composure breaking. "My war is the same as yours. You can't stop me. I'll do it with or without you." I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, not approval, but recognition. He saw his own young, vengeful self in me. He knew I meant it. Bruce didn't send me away. Instead, he gave me an ultimatum that was really a beginning. If you step into this world, you do it my way. No exceptions. You train, you learn, you obey. This isn't about revenge. It's about justice. Do you understand the difference? I nodded, my heart pounding. The training was brutal. It was more than just physical combat, though there was plenty of that. It was forensics, chemistry, criminology, stealth, and technology. Bruce was a relentless teacher. He pushed me harder than any circus routine ever had, but I was a prodigy. My acrobatic background gave me a natural advantage in mobility and agility. I could move in ways he couldn't, and he began to incorporate that into my style. We discovered the man responsible for my parents' murder was a gangster named Tony Zuko. He'd been extorting protection money from the circus, and when Mr. Haley refused to pay, Zuko had the rope sabotaged to send a message. Batman was closing in, but the evidence was circumstantial. The police couldn't touch him. The anger in me grew, becoming a sharp, focused point. I designed a costume, something that honored my past. Bright colors, a tunic, a domino mask. It wasn't meant for shadows. It was a declaration. When Bruce saw the designs, he was silent for a long time. "It will make you a target," he warned. "I'm not trying to hide," I replied. "I want them to see me coming." The night I became Robin started with a lead. Zuko was overseeing a shipment of illegal weapons at the docks. Batman's plan was surveillance, to gather the final piece of evidence. But I had my own plan. While he was monitoring from the rooftops, I slipped into the warehouse. I moved through the rafters, a ghost in the high steel, feeling more at home than I had since the fall. I saw Zuko, his face etched in my memory forever. The rage was a white-hot fire. I dropped down in front of him. He and his men were startled, laughing at the little bird in a costume. They stopped laughing when I disarmed the first two thugs with a series of flips and strikes. It was a whirlwind. I was fueled by pure emotion, and it was messy, dangerous. Batman intervened, a dark avalanche of controlled violence, taking down the rest. Zuko tried to flee. I chased him to the end of a pier. He was cornered, terrified. I advanced, my fists clenched. I wanted to hurt him. I wanted to make him feel a fraction of the pain he'd caused. Batman's voice cut through my fury from behind me. "Dick, don't! This is the line. Cross it, and you become him." I looked at Zuko's cowering form, then at my own hands, shaking with adrenaline and hate. I lowered my fists. We took him in. Justice was served, but as we stood on the rooftop overlooking the city, Batman placed a hand on my shoulder. "You did good tonight, but your anger is a weapon you can't always control. From now on, we do this together, as partners." I looked out at the city that had taken my parents and given me a new purpose. I was no longer just Dick Grayson. I was Robin. Being Robin was an adjustment. The public and the criminals didn't know what to make of me. The newspapers called me Batman's mystery boy partner. The cops were skeptical. Commissioner Gordon would give Batman that weary, trusting look, but his eyes would narrow when they fell on me. "Is this wise, Batman?" "He's just a boy." Batman's reply was always the same. "He's capable," and I was. I proved it, night after night. We took down petty thieves, drug dealers, and the first of the truly bizarre rogues gallery that Gotham seemed to specialize in. I brought something to the fight that Batman didn't: Lightness, not just in the colorful costume, but in attitude. I'd crack jokes, I'd laugh while I was flipping over a thug's head. It unnerved them. Batman was terror. I was chaos. Bruce disapproved, of course. "This is not a game, Dick." "I know it's not," I'd retort, "but if I'm not having a little fun, then what's the point? We're helping people. Shouldn't that feel good?" He never had an answer for that. At home, Alfred was the mediator. He'd patch up my scrapes, listen to my excited retellings of the night's events, and gently remind Bruce that I was, in fact, a 13-year-old who needed to do his algebra homework. It was a strange, fractured life, school by day, crime fighting by night. But for the first time since the circus, I felt whole. I had a family, as unconventional as it was. My first real test against one of Batman's major rogues was the Scarecrow. Professor Jonathan Crane was using a new, more potent form of his fear toxin, and people were literally being scared to death. Batman was concerned, more than I'd ever seen him. His toxin preys on your deepest fears, Dick. Your mind is your greatest asset, but in this case, it could be your greatest weakness. You need to stay back, analyze from the cave. I agreed, reluctantly. But when Batman went to investigate a lead at the Gotham University chemistry lab, and his signal went dead, I knew I couldn't stay back. I suited up and went after him. The lab was filled with a hazy green mist. I found Batman on his knees, trapped in a nightmare, muttering about his parents' murder. Scarecrow stood over him, ready to deliver a final lethal dose. I launched myself at him, a whirlwind of color in the toxic fog. He was startled, turning his scythe on me. "And what does the little bird fear?" he hissed, releasing a cloud of toxin directly into my face. The world dissolved. I was back under the big top on the platform. I saw my parents smiling, ready to fly. I swung, I flew, and then I saw the rope snap. But this time it was my hands that were slipping. I was the one who failed to catch them. I heard their screams, saw the accusation in their eyes as they fell. The guilt was crushing, suffocating. I was falling with them into a pit of despair, but then a voice cut through the hallucination. It was Bruce's, from our training. "Fear is a tool, Dick. Understand it, control it. Don't let it control you." I focused on that voice. I pushed the image away, focusing on the real world, on the feel of the floor beneath me. I got up. Scarecrow was stunned. "Impossible!" I didn't joke, I didn't smile. I just took him down, hard. I had faced my worst fear and won. When I revived Batman, he looked at me, and for the first time I saw something akin to pride in his eyes. "I told you to stay in the cave." "You also told me to always have your back," I replied. He just nodded. We had passed the test. Years began to blur together. I grew, both as Dick Grayson and as Robin. I became a fixture in Gotham, the city's brighter, hopeful protector. I even formed a team with other sidekicks, Kid Flash, Aqualad, Speedy. We called ourselves the Teen Titans. It was a revelation. For the first time, I had peers who understood the strange duality of my life. We fought our own battles, saved the world a few times, and I learned to lead. It was a necessary counterbalance to the increasingly grim and obsessive world of Batman. Bruce was changing, or maybe I was just growing up and starting to see him more clearly. His mission was everything. The darkness that fueled him was all-consuming. Our arguments became more frequent. He saw my time with the Titans as a distraction. I saw it as building my own life. The breaking point was a case involving Two-Face. It was personal for Bruce. Harvey Dent had been a friend. Batman's plan was reckless, a brute force assault that disregarded all safety protocols. I argued for a more subtle approach, one that minimized the risk to the hostages. "We don't have time for finesse, Robin," he growled. "We do this my way." "Your way is going to get people killed," I shot back. It was the first time I had openly defied him on a tactical level in the field. We went in, and it was a disaster. A warehouse explosion, civilians nearly caught in the crossfire. We saved them, but just barely. Back in the cave, the fight was explosive. "You're impulsive, you don't think," he yelled. "And you're so obsessed with your war that you've forgotten how to be a hero," I screamed back. The words hung in the air, toxic and final. I looked at him, my mentor, my father in all but blood, and I saw a stranger. The anger, the grief, the years of pressure, it all boiled over. I took off my Robin tunic and threw it at the computer console. I quit. The words were quiet, but they echoed in the vast cavern. I turned and walked away, leaving the shadows of the Batcave behind me. Leaving Gotham was the hardest and easiest thing I'd ever done. The silence in the days that followed was deafening. Alfred tried to bridge the gap, but the chasm between me and Bruce was too wide. I moved to Bloodhaven, Gotham's uglier, grittier neighbor. It was a city without a Batman, without hope. It was perfect. I needed to do this on my own terms, to prove to myself and to Bruce that I wasn't just a sidekick. I wasn't just Robin. I created a new identity, a new suit, dark blue, black, and a bird symbol across the chest. I was Nightwing. The name came from a Kryptonian legend, a story of two heroes told to me by Superman. It represented a hero who operated outside the shadow of the great legend. It was who I was meant to be. The fight in Bloodhaven was different, dirtier. There were no costume clowns, just organized crime, corruption, and desperation. It was thankless work, but it was mine. I built a life there. I made friends. I had relationships. I led the Titans. I was my own man. My encounters with Batman were rare and professional. There was a tension there, a history that neither of us knew how to address. But over time, the sharp edges of our anger dulled. We would work together when a crisis demanded it, and the old rhythm, the flawless partnership was still there, buried under the layers of resentment. We were like a father and son who had a terrible fight and were now navigating an awkward truce. He never said he was proud of me for Nightwing, but he didn't have to. The fact that he didn't try to stop me was his way of saying it. Gotham had a new Robin now, Jason Todd, a tough, angry kid from the streets. I saw myself in him, the raw pain and fury. I tried to reach out, but he saw me as a relic, the golden boy he could never live up to. I worried for him. I knew that anger, and I knew where it could lead if left unchecked. My fears, tragically, were proven right. The news of Jason Todd's death hit me like a physical blow. I was in Bloodhaven when the call came from Alfred. His voice was thick with a grief I hadn't heard since the early days. The Joker he had killed Jason. The details were horrific. Bruce was shattered. He had fallen into a darkness deeper than any I had ever seen. I went back to Gotham immediately. The cave was a tomb. Bruce was at the computer, obsessively running through the crime scene data, his face a mask of cold, hard fury. He wasn't grieving, he was avenging. "Bruce," I said. He didn't look at me. "I'm working. You need to stop. You need to process this." "There is nothing to process," he said, his voice like granite. "He's gone, because of me, because I wasn't good enough." I saw then that this was my fault too. I had left. I hadn't been there to help, to guide Jason, to be a brother to him. The guilt was a fresh wound. We didn't talk about it. We couldn't. We went after the Joker with a singular, terrifying purpose. It was the old partnership, but twisted, fueled by a shared, unspoken grief and rage. When we finally cornered the clown, Batman was on the verge of crossing that line he always talked about. I was there to pull him back, just as he had for me with Zuko. "This won't bring him back, Bruce." He stopped. The fight went out of him. In the aftermath, a new understanding slowly grew between us. The loss of Jason was a chasm we had both fallen into, and the only way out was together. I never put on the Robin suit again. But I became a constant in Gotham's defense once more, not as Batman's partner, but as his equal, as his brother. The boy who flew through the air was gone, replaced by a man who had learned to soar through the darkness on his own terms. The story of Robin had ended. The legend of Nightwing had begun. And it was mine to tell. The months after Jason's death were a long, cold winter in the soul of everyone connected to Batman. Bruce became a spectre, more machine than man. His methods grew harsher, his presence more terrifying. I split my time between Bloodhaven's gritty streets and Gotham's oppressive shadow, trying to be a bridge for Bruce back to some semblance of humanity. It was a losing battle. He'd built walls around his pain that even I couldn't scale. I threw myself into my work in Bloodhaven, the straightforward, brutal crime fighting, a welcome anesthetic. It was during this time I truly forged my own identity. Nightwing wasn't just a name change, it was a philosophy. I interacted with people Batman would ignore. I talked to the community, built informants who trusted me not because they feared me, but because I showed them respect. I saved a woman named Amy Rohrbach, a tough, no-nonsense cop who would later become one of my few allies on the Bloodhaven police force. It was a different kind of war, a grind, but it was mine. One night, after a particularly brutal fight with a new gang moving in on the city's dockyards, I sat on a rooftop, catching my breath. I looked south towards the faint glow of Gotham on the horizon. The guilt was a persistent ghost. I should have been there for Jason. I should have tried harder with Bruce, but another thought, one I'd been suppressing, surfaced. If I had stayed, would I have become like Bruce is now? Consumed, bitter, a monument to loss. Leaving wasn't just an act of rebellion. It might have been an act of self-preservation. The thought didn't absolve the guilt, but it gave it a new, complicated context. The thaw, when it came, arrived in the most unexpected form. Her name was Barbara Gordon. I'd known her for years, first as Commissioner Gordon's brilliant, fiery daughter, then as Batgirl. She was always a step ahead, her mind a razor-sharp weapon that often outperformed our brawn. We had a history, a flirting, will-they-won't-they tension that was always overshadowed by the mission. Then the Joker happened to her, too. He shot her, paralyzed her from the waist down. Another life shattered by that monster. I visited her in the hospital, my heart a lead weight. But Barbara was different. She wasn't broken. Angry, yes, furious, but her spirit was unquenchable. She refused to be defined by what she lost. She reinvented herself, becoming Oracle, the information nexus for the entire superhero community. She became the eyes and ears we all relied on. My respect for her bloomed into something deeper, something profound. We started talking, really talking, not as costumed colleagues, but as Dick and Babs. We shared our grief, our frustrations with Bruce, our hopes for the future. We understood each other's pain in a way no one else could. One night, over a secure comms line, she was walking me through a complex data hack in Bloodhaven. "You know," I said, a smile in my voice for the first time in months, "it's kind of hot how you can bring a city's entire traffic grid to its knees." She laughed, a real, genuine sound that felt like sunshine breaking through Gotham's clouds. "Down, Boy Wonder. Some of us use our brains for more than just figuring out the aerodynamics of a quadruple somersault." In that moment, something shifted. The world felt a little less heavy. We were two wounded birds. And maybe, just maybe, we could teach each other to fly again in a different way. A crisis larger than any of us pulled the old band back together. It was a universe-level threat, one that required every hero on the board. The Justice League was stretched thin. I got the call from Bruce. It wasn't a request. It was a strategic necessity. "Nightwing, I need you in Gotham. The entire eastern seaboard is a target." Suiting up to fight alongside Batman again felt strangely familiar, like putting on a well-worn glove, but one that didn't quite fit the same way anymore. I was no longer the sidekick following orders. I was a veteran hero in my own right, and I operated like one. During the battle, which raged from the streets to the rooftops, I found myself not just following Batman's lead, but co-leading. I coordinated with the Flash, directed Green Arrow, and implemented strategies Batman hadn't even considered. At one pivotal moment, with a building about to collapse on a group of civilians, Batman barked an order to secure the perimeter. I saw a different angle, a riskier one involving an unstable gravlift and my own acrobatic skills. "Negative," I said over the comm, my voice calm but firm. "I have a better play. Cover me." There was a tense silence on the channel. Then, a single word from Batman. Acknowledged. He trusted me. I executed the move, saving everyone. In the aftermath, covered in dust and sweat, he stood beside me as we watched the sun rise over a saved city. He didn't look at me, but he spoke. Your plan was efficient. From Bruce Wayne, that was a roaring standing ovation. The partnership was reborn, not as Batman and Robin, but as Batman and Nightwing, equals. With a new dynamic established with Bruce, I felt a newfound confidence in my role in Bloodhaven. I was making real progress, carving out a piece of the city from the mob's control. That's when a new player entered the scene, a ghost from my past I never expected to see again, the Joker. He'd come to Bloodhaven, he announced on pirated airwaves, for a change of scenery. And he'd brought a new friend. My blood ran cold. He had a new Robin. A girl. She was young, fierce, and dangerously unpredictable. Her name was Stephanie Brown. Batman was already en route, his rage a palpable force over the comms. The situation was a powder keg. Joker was using Stephanie as a prop in his deranged game, trying to lure Batman into a final, fatal confrontation. We tracked them to an abandoned amusement park on the city's outskirts. It was a nightmare tableau. Batman went after Joker, a collision of primordial forces. My mission was to save Stephanie. I found her tied to a giant rotating wheel, a death trap straight out of a circus sideshow. The parallels were not lost on me. As I worked to free her, she spat venom at me. "I don't need your help. I'm his Robin. I can handle it." She was just like Jason, just like I had been, all anger and no control. "Being Robin isn't about handling it," I said, dodging a projectile. "It's about trusting your partner. Now hold still." I got her free, but Joker had anticipated it. The whole structure began to collapse. In that moment, it wasn't Nightwing saving a replacement Robin. It was Dick Grayson saving a kid from the same fate that took my parents, that took Jason. I got her out just as Batman subdued the Joker. Stephanie was shaken, her bravado shattered. She looked at me, and for a second I saw the scared kid underneath. It was a brutal reminder that the legacy of Robin was a heavy, dangerous mantle, and it was a legacy I had helped create. The encounter with Stephanie Brown left me unsettled. The cycle seemed endless. Bruce finds a broken child, gives them a uniform and a mission, and sets them loose on a city that eats the innocent. I knew he meant well, that he was trying to save them in the only way he knew how, but it felt like building an army of damaged soldiers. I needed a break from it all, from Gotham's gloom, from Bloodhaven's grind, from the weight of legacy. I took a leave from the Titans and went on a journey, not as Nightwing, but as Dick Grayson. I traveled using the skills Bruce taught me not to fight, but to explore. I free-climbed mountains in Nepal, navigated rainforests in the Amazon, and even spent a week with a nomadic tribe in Mongolia, learning their ways. I was searching for something I couldn't name. Purpose, maybe, or just peace. In the quiet monastery high in the Himalayas, an old monk, who seemed to know more about me than he should, said something that stuck with me. "You carry two fathers with you," he said, his eyes seeing right through me. "One gave you wings of air and light. The other gave you wings of shadow and night. You spend so much time deciding which wings to use, you forget that you are the one who chooses how to fly." It was a revelation. I wasn't just a product of the circus or the Batcave. I was the synthesis, the light and the dark, the hope and the vengeance. I could be both. I had to be both. I returned to Bloodhaven weeks later, my mind clearer than it had been in years. The city was still a mess, but I felt renewed. I was ready to fly again, on my own terms. I returned to Bloodhaven to find a new threat had emerged in my absence, a ruthless, highly organized gang called the Maroney Cartel, a splinter group from Gotham's old mob families. They were smarter, more tech-savvy, and they were carving up the city with terrifying efficiency. My usual methods weren't working. They were prepared for a costumed brawler. I needed to get inside their operation. This meant going undercover. I created a new identity, a slick, ambitious freelance enforcer from out of town looking for work. I grew a scruffy beard, traded my Nightwing suit for leather jackets and a cocky attitude, and immersed myself in the city's underworld. It was a dangerous game. I had to walk the line perfectly, tough enough to gain their respect, but not so brutal that I crossed my own lines. I started small, taking on jobs, proving my worth. I had to fight, to lie, to pretend to be someone I despised. It was a strain. My only tether to my real self was my nightly check-ins with Barbara. Her voice in my ear was my anchor. "Remember who you are in there, Dick," she'd say. "Don't get lost." After weeks of work, I earned an audience with the boss, Riccardo Moroni. He was a cold, calculating man, not a thug. He tested me, poked and prodded at my story. I held my nerve. I was in. The intel I gathered was a goldmine. But the deeper I went, the more I saw the human cost of their operation. The families being extorted, the lives being ruined. The line between Dick Grayson undercover and the persona I was playing began to blur. I started taking risks, sabotaging shipments from the inside, protecting targets. It was only a matter of time before they figured it out. The blowback from my undercover work was swift and brutal. Moroni had been suspicious from the start. He set a trap, using a police informant within his ranks as bait. I took the bait, trying to warn the informant, and walked right into an ambush in a deserted shipyard warehouse. They didn't try to kill me. They wanted to know who I was. The next 48 hours were a haze of pain. They tortured me, demanding the name of my employer. I held out, using every mental discipline Bruce and Alfred had ever drilled into me. I focused on the good memories. The smell of the circus, Alfred's scones, Barbara's laugh, the feeling of flight. It was the image of my parents, smiling and whole, that gave me the final burst of strength. In a moment of carelessness, one of my captors left my utility belt, which they'd confiscated, on a nearby crate. It was just out of reach. I used a trick I'd learned as a boy, dislocating my thumb to slip one hand from the restraint. It was agony, but it was freedom. I reached my belt, activated the emergency beacon, and armed a sonic grenade. The resulting chaos was my opening. I fought my way out, injured and bleeding, but alive. I didn't go to a hospital. I went to a safe house Barbara had set up. She was there, her face a mask of worry and relief. She patched me up, her hands gentle and sure. As I lay there, exhausted and broken, I realized something. I hadn't been trying to prove myself to Bruce or to the world. I was trying to prove to myself that I could fight this war my way and win. And I had. I'd gotten the intel, I'd survived, and I'd exposed a major part of Moroni's network. It was a messy, painful victory, but it was mine. The city was a little safer because of the choices I made. The fallout from the Moroni case had an unexpected consequence. The Bloodhaven Police Department, which had mostly viewed me as a vigilante nuisance, now had solid, actionable evidence I'd helped procure. Detective Amy Rohrbach, the cop I'd saved years before, used it to secure dozens of arrests. A small faction within the BPD, led by Rohrbach, began to see Nightwing not as an outlaw, but as an asset. It was a fragile, unofficial truce, but it was a start. It felt like a real victory, a sign that my methods could create lasting change. This period of relative stability allowed me to focus on my personal life, specifically my relationship with Barbara. It had blossomed from a deep friendship into a powerful, loving partnership. We were good for each other. She grounded me when my instincts got too reckless, and I pulled her out of the cave of her own brilliant mind, reminding her to live in the world, not just observe it. We'd have pizza on the rooftop of the Gotham clock tower she used as her base, talking for hours about everything and nothing. It was during one of these nights that she brought up the topic of the future. "What happens next, Dick? We can't do this forever." I knew what she meant. The physical toll, the constant danger, the psychological burden. "I don't know," I admitted, looking out at the city lights. "But whatever it is, we'll figure it out. Together." For the first time, I could actually picture a life beyond the mask. It was a terrifying and exhilarating thought. But this is Gotham, and peace is always a temporary illusion. A call came in from Bruce. His voice was grim. "Dick, it's about the Joker. He's escaped again, and he's taken a new hostage. It's Tim Drake, the third Robin." The cycle was starting all over again. Tim Drake was different. He wasn't an orphan from the circus or an angry kid from the streets. He was a detective. He'd figured out our identities through sheer intellect and had approached Batman not for vengeance, but because he saw a hero slipping into darkness after Jason's death and believed he needed a Robin. He was the Robin Batman chose, not the one he saved, and he was brilliant at it. The thought of the Joker getting his hands on Tim, a kid who was more level-headed and strategic than any of us had been at his age, was a new kind of horror. We mobilized instantly. Oracle was the command center, her fingers flying across keyboards, tracking every digital footprint the Joker left, which was deliberately messy and chaotic. Batman was a force of nature, his focus so intense it was frightening. I took to the streets, using my connections and my more approachable reputation to gather intel from the city's underworld. The word was that the Joker was planning his greatest punchline. We finally tracked them to the old Gotham reservoir. It was another death trap, of course. Tim was suspended over a vat of what the Joker claimed was his new permanent Joker toxin. The setup was designed to force Batman into an impossible choice: save Tim or stop the toxin from being released into the city's water supply. "The classic trolley problem, Batsy," the Joker cackled. "Do you save the one little bird, or do you save the whole flock?" Batman went for the toxin release mechanism. "Nightwing," he growled. "The Robin." He didn't say, "Save him." He didn't have to. It was the ultimate sign of trust. He was trusting me with his Robin. I didn't let him down. The fight at the reservoir was a ballet of violence and precision. While Batman engaged the Joker in a brutal personal duel, I went for Tim. The Joker had henchmen, of course, and a series of deadly obstacles between me and the platform. I moved like I hadn't in years. Every acrobatic move, every strike, a fusion of my circus grace and Batman's ruthless efficiency. I was the Flying Grayson and the Dark Knight's heir all at once. I reached the platform, but the mechanism was complex, a Joker-fied puzzle box. "It's wired to a weight sensor," Tim yelled, his voice strained but clear. "If you cut the wrong wire or my weight shifts too much, it drops me." I could hear Batman and the Joker fighting behind me, the sound of fists hitting flesh and maniacal laughter. I blocked it out. My world narrowed to the wires and Tim's face. I remembered a puzzle Bruce had forced me to solve underwater years ago. Panic is the enemy. Logic is your weapon. I traced the circuits, my mind working faster than it ever had. "The green one, Tim! I'm cutting the green one!" I sliced it. The mechanism shuddered and froze. I grabbed Tim and pulled him to safety just as Batman delivered a final, concussive blow that sent the Joker tumbling into the water, swept away by the currents. We stood there, the three of us, panting in the silence. Batman looked from Tim, safe and sound, to me. He didn't say a word. He just placed a hand on my shoulder, his grip firm. Then he did the same to Tim. In that single, silent gesture, I felt it all. The gratitude, the pride, the acknowledgement of a family, broken and stitched back together, but still a family. We had saved the Robin. We had saved the city. And for now, that was enough. The story wasn't over. It would never be over. But we were still in it, together. The victory over the Joker felt different this time. It wasn't a return to the status quo, but a step forward. Batman, Tim, and I, we started operating as a unit, a true family. Bruce began to delegate, to trust our instincts implicitly. He even started joining us for post-mission debriefs in the cave that didn't immediately devolve into tactical analysis. Sometimes we'd just sit, eating the sandwiches Alfred insisted on making, the silence comfortable for once. It was during this period that a new threat emerged, one that didn't come from Gotham's rogues gallery, but from within the superhero community itself. A schism was forming, an ideological war between those who believed in total transparency and those who fought for the necessary secrets that protected us. Superman and Batman were on opposite sides. The Pro-Registration Act was looming, and it threatened to tear everything apart. I was caught in the middle. My loyalty was to Batman, to our methods, but my heart leaned towards Superman's idealism, the hope he represented. I found myself acting as a go-between, trying to find a middle ground where none existed. It was exhausting. I saw the toll it was taking on Bruce. The paranoia that had always been a tool was becoming his entire personality. He was preparing for a war against his friends. I argued with him, louder and more passionately than I had in years. "They're not the enemy, Bruce. They're trying to do what's right, same as us. Their version of right will get people killed, Dick. It will get you killed." The old patterns were reasserting themselves. I felt the walls going up again. The superhero civil war exploded, and it was every bit as brutal as I feared. I stayed with Batman, with the anti-registration side. It wasn't that I fully agreed with him, but my family was here. Tim, Alfred, Barbara. Though she remained neutral as Oracle, her feed's a lifeline for both sides. Fighting against people I considered friends, heroes I'd looked up to my entire life, was a special kind of hell. I crossed fists with the Flash. I had to outmaneuver Green Arrow. Every victory felt like a loss. The lowest point was a battle in the ruins of Metropolis. I was cornered by a squad of pro-registration heroes, including a few of my old Teen Titans. I was tired, my suit torn, and for the first time, I questioned the path I was on. Was this really about justice, or was it just about blind loyalty to Bruce? In that moment of doubt, I was captured, thrown into a high-tech prison designed to hold people like us. The irony was bitter. I was in a cage, just like the criminals I'd spent my life putting away. The isolation was deafening. It gave me too much time to think, to remember the monk's words about choosing my own wings. I had chosen to follow Bruce, but I hadn't chosen this war. I had let myself be swept along by his tide. As I sat in that cell, I made a decision. When I got out, I would fly my own course, no matter what. My escape from the prison wasn't a solo effort. It was Barbara, operating from the shadows, who found a flaw in their system and created a distraction. It was Tim, who risked everything to slip me a lockpick. And it was a surprising ally from the other side, Donna Troy, my old Titan teammate, who looked the other way at a crucial moment. It was a stark reminder that this conflict was artificial. Our real bonds of friendship ran deeper than any law. I didn't go back to Batman's side. Instead, I went to ground. I became a free agent, working to minimize the collateral damage, to save lives on both sides. I was a ghost in the machine, answering to no one. Bruce was furious when he found out. Our comms exchange was icy. "You're compromising the mission, Nightwing." "No, Bruce. I'm finally on the right mission. The one to save us from ourselves." The war eventually ended, as all wars do, with a truce that left everyone scarred and no one truly victorious. The landscape had shifted. The trust was gone. In the aftermath, my relationship with Bruce was more fractured than ever. We had chosen different paths in the heat of battle, and the chasm between us felt wider than the Gotham River. I returned to Blüdhaven, to my city, to my war. It was simpler. The lines were clearer. The good guys wore badges sometimes, and the bad guys wore greed on their sleeves. I needed the simplicity. I needed to remember what I was fighting for. Blüdhaven was a welcome, if brutal, homecoming. The Maroni cartel was wounded but not dead, and new predators were moving in to fill the power vacuum. My understanding with Detective Rohrbach and her faction within the BPD became my greatest asset. We developed a system. She'd feed me intel on operations too dirty or too politically charged for her to touch, and I'd handle it, leaving enough evidence for her to secure cleanup arrests. It was an elegant, if illegal, dance. But the darkness of the superhero war had changed me. I found myself being colder, more efficient. The jokes I used to crack mid-fight died on my lips. The hope I tried to project felt like a costume over a suit of armor. Barbara noticed. "You're pulling away, Dick," she said one night over the comm, her voice soft with concern. "I'm focusing," I countered. I'm getting the job done. The job is saving people, not just punishing the guilty. Don't lose the part of you that remembers that. She was right, of course. She always was. But the weight of it all, Jason's death, the civil war, the endless grind of Bloodhaven, felt heavier than ever. I started taking bigger risks, pushing my body harder, as if I could outrun the ghosts by sheer physical exertion. It was a dangerous game, and I was the only player who didn't know the rules were rigged. The breaking point came from a direction I never anticipated. A new villain emerged, calling himself Blockbuster. He was a mountain of a man, a brilliant crime lord enhanced with super strength and near invulnerability. He wasn't a clown or a riddler, he was a businessman, and his business was owning Bloodhaven. He systematically dismantled my network. My informants started disappearing. The few honest cops I worked with were framed, transferred, or worse. He even discovered my safe houses. He was methodical, patient, and he was winning. The final blow was personal. He discovered my identity. Not through some grand deduction, but through old-fashioned, brutal torture of one of my closest confidants. I walked into a trap to save them, and I was faced with Blockbuster on a rooftop. The city sprawled beneath us. "Richard John Grayson," he rumbled, his voice like grinding stones. "I don't need to kill you. I just need to break you. I will burn your life to the ground. Everyone you care about, Barbara Gordon, Alfred Pennyworth, even that old man who runs the circus. There is no hole deep enough for you to hide them." For the first time since I was 8 years old, I felt true, undiluted terror. Batman's war was against crime. My war had just become personal, and I was losing. Blockbuster was a man of his word. The next few weeks were a waking nightmare. My apartment was bombed. My credit was ruined. A series of fabricated evidence painted Dick Grayson as a corrupt cop fighter and embezzler. The fragile trust I'd built with the BPD evaporated overnight. Detective Rohrbach was suspended. I was a ghost in my own city, hunted by the police and Blockbuster's men simultaneously. I was forced to operate from the absolute shadows, more rat than bird. My conversations with Barbara became strained, frantic. I had to push her away to make her sever all ties with me publicly for her own safety. It was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. "I'm not afraid of him, Dick," she argued. "I am!" I shouted back, the admission tearing out of me. "I can't lose you too, Babs. I can't." The silence on the line was agony. "Okay," she whispered finally, "but I'm not gone. I'm just hidden." I was completely, utterly alone. This was a loss Batman had never prepared me for. He taught me to fight the monster in the dark. He never taught me how to fight when the monster owned the darkness. I was living Blockbuster's promise, a life burned to the ground. The hope that defined Nightwing was extinguished. All that was left was the grim determination to survive and make him pay. I became someone else, a creature of pure vengeance. I stopped being Nightwing and became a spectre haunting Blockbuster's empire. I used every dirty trick, every psychological ploy Batman had ever taught me, and then some. I wasn't trying to arrest him anymore. I was trying to destroy him. I targeted his finances, his shipments, his lieutenants. I made him look weak, erratic. I was a ghost in his machine, and the cost was my own soul. The final confrontation was in his penthouse headquarters. I was battered, my suit in tatters, fueled by nothing but rage and desperation. He was waiting for me, smug and powerful. "The little bird finally comes to die," he mocked. The fight was savage. I was outclassed in strength, but I had nothing left to lose. I used the environment, my agility, my pain. I led him onto a glass sky bridge connecting two towers. He charged, a bull seeing red. At the last second I dropped, using a grappling line to swing underneath. He smashed through the glass. He didn't fall to his death. His invulnerability saved him. But he fell dozens of stories, crashing through the roof of a police cruiser below, where a newly reinstated Detective Rohrbach was waiting with a warrant and a squad of officers. He was defeated, not by my fists, but by the system I had helped undermine. As the cops cuffed the dazed giant, I looked down from the broken bridge. I had won. I had saved my city. But as I looked at my reflection in a shard of glass, I didn't see a hero. I saw a hollow man. I had become everything Bruce warned me against. I had crossed the line. In the aftermath, I was adrift. Bloodhaven was safer, but it felt like a tomb. The victory was ashes in my mouth. I had proven Blockbuster right. He had broken me. I'd abandoned my principles to beat him. I couldn't be Nightwing anymore. The suit felt like a lie. I disappeared. I didn't go to Gotham or the Titans. I just vanished. I traveled, but this time it wasn't a journey of discovery. It was an exile. I worked odd jobs under aliases, trying to remember what it felt like to be just Dick Grayson. But Dick Grayson was a fiction, a ghost story told by a boy who died with his parents. I was no one. Months passed. The world moved on. A new hero emerged in Bloodhaven, or so I heard. I didn't care. The anger had burned out, leaving only a vast, empty numbness. It was in a dusty port town in South America, working on a fishing boat, that I saw a kid walking a tightrope he'd strung between two crumbling buildings. He was poor. His clothes were ragged, but he had a look of pure, unadulterated joy on his face as he balanced, his arms outstretched like wings. I stood there, frozen, watching him fly, and for the first time in a year, I didn't see death in the air. I saw life. I saw hope. I remembered why I put on the suit in the first place. It wasn't for vengeance. It wasn't for justice. It was for that feeling. It was to protect the simple, beautiful act of a kid feeling like he could fly. The numbness began to crack. The return wasn't a grand event. It was quiet. I went back to Gotham first, not to the Batcave, but to the cemetery. I stood at my parents' grave, something I hadn't done in years. I told them about Blockbuster. I told them I was sorry for losing my way. I told them I was tired. As I stood there, I felt a presence beside me. I didn't need to look. It was Bruce. We stood in silence for a long time, the two orphans, surrounded by ghosts. "I heard what happened in Bloodhaven," he said, his voice low. "Alfred keeps a scrapbook." I let out a shaky breath, expecting a lecture. "I crossed the line, Bruce." He was quiet for a moment. "We all have lines, Dick. The important thing is to find your way back to your side of it." It was the most forgiveness I was ever going to get from him. Then he said, "Gotham needs you. I need you. There's a situation. It's family." The way he said family sent a chill down my spine. He wasn't talking about me or Tim. He was talking about something else, something darker. I looked at him, at the genuine plea in his eyes, a look he so rarely showed. The Bat family was fractured, and a new storm was coming. The prodigal son had returned. It was time to go home. The family situation was worse than I could have imagined. An assassin, a league of killers, and a boy. Bruce, in his endless, complicated life, had a son. A biological son named Damian Wayne, raised from birth by the League of Assassins, and his mother, Talia al Ghul. He was 10 years old, a coiled spring of lethal intent, arrogant, violent, and now dumped on Bruce's doorstep like a monstrous inheritance. The Batcave had become a war zone. Tim, the current Robin, was rightfully threatened and furious. Bruce was trying and failing to be a father to a child soldier. Alfred looked more exhausted than I'd ever seen him, and Damian saw me as just another obstacle to his birthright. "Grayson," he sneered the first time we met, "the adopted one, the placeholder." I looked at this little boy, all sharp edges and deeper pain, and I saw a reflection again, not of myself, but of Jason, the raw, untamed fury, the product of a terrible childhood. But unlike Jason, Damian had never known a moment of kindness. Bruce's method, strict discipline, unwavering rules, was only making it worse. It was like trying to train a tiger by yelling at it. One night, after a particularly disastrous attempt at a patrol, where Damian nearly killed a petty thief, Bruce and Tim were locked in a heated argument about what to do. I watched Damian, sitting alone in the corner, sharpening a knife, his small face a mask of contempt that couldn't quite hide the confusion and hurt underneath. And I made a decision. Bruce had given me a path when I was lost. Maybe it was my turn. I walked over to the boy. "Put the knife away," I said, my voice calm. "We're going for a drive." He looked at me as if I'd suggested we roll in mud. Why? Because, I said, if you're going to be a Robin, you need to learn the most important rule. He eyed me suspiciously. And what is that? I allowed a small, real smile to touch my lips for the first time in over a year. First, we get burgers. Then, we talk. The long, dark night for Dick Grayson was over. A new, even more complicated day was dawning, and it was wearing a scowl. Damien was predictably obstinate. He sat in the passenger seat of my car, arms crossed, radiating a disdain so potent it was almost a physical force. This is a waste of time. My metabolism is optimized for peak performance, not for processed ground meat. I didn't argue. I drove to a grimy all-night diner on the outskirts of Gotham, the kind of place where the coffee could strip paint and the clients didn't ask questions. I ordered 2 cheeseburgers and 2 chocolate shakes. He stared at his plate as if it were a biological hazard. "This is your great wisdom. Junk food." "No," I said, taking a bite of my burger. "The wisdom is knowing when to step out of the cave. Bruce forgets that. He thinks the mission is everything, but the mission is just a job. This," I gestured between us, "is life. And you can't fight for life if you don't know what you're fighting for." I told him about the circus, not the tragedy, but the joy. The smell of the animals, the taste of cotton candy, the feeling of flying. I talked about the little things. He was silent, listening while pretending not to. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, he picked up his burger and took a small, suspicious bite. He chewed, his expression unchanging. Then he took another. He didn't say he liked it. He didn't have to. It was the first brick in a very long, very high wall. Bruce's approach with Damien was failing spectacularly. Every lesson in detective work or controlled combat was met with a recitation of League of Assassins doctrine or a sneer. The tension between him, Tim, and Bruce was a tripwire waiting to be sprung. I started inserting myself into their training session. Bruce, frustrated, would often defer to me. "Show him," he'd grunt before retreating to the bat computer. I didn't try to counter Damien's league training. I built on it. I showed him how a killing strike could be modified with the same precision and efficiency to disarm and incapacitate. "The goal is to end the fight," I told him, blocking his practice sword with my eskrima sticks. "A broken arm ends a fight just as well as a slit throat, and you don't have to carry the weight of a life afterward." He was a prodigy, faster and more naturally skilled than I had ever been, but he had no control. "Your anger makes you predictable," I said, after flipping him onto the mats for the 10th time. "You are an annoyance," he spat, springing back to his feet. "Then be better than your annoyance," I challenged. It was a different language, not the language of a father, but of an older brother, a rival, a potential ally. He began to respond, not because he respected me, but because he couldn't stand the idea of me being better at anything. The test came on the streets. We were tracking a human trafficker, a nasty piece of work named Cobb. Damien, against direct orders, engaged alone. By the time Batman and I arrived, he had 2 of Cobb's men down, bleeding from wounds that were too close to fatal for comfort. Cobb himself had a knife to a young girl's throat, using her as a shield. Batman started calculating angles, probabilities. Damien had his sword drawn, his body coiled to strike, consequences be damned. I saw it in his eyes. He was going to rush him, and the girl would die. I didn't think. I moved. I didn't go for Cobb. I went for Damien. I tackled him, not hard, but enough to break his lethal focus. "Look at me," I hissed in his ear. He struggled, furious. "He is a worm. He deserves to die." "Maybe," I said, my grip firm, "but she doesn't. Is her death an acceptable price for his?" I pointed at the terrified girl. "A Robin protects the innocent, always. That is the first rule, the only rule that matters." I saw the conflict in his eyes, the League's kill-the-target dogma warring with this new, alien concept. He hesitated. That was all Batman needed. A batarang knocked the knife from Cobb's hand, and the fight was over. Later, in the cave, Damien was silent. He hadn't apologized, but he hadn't argued either. He just looked at the Robin suit in its case, then at me, with a new, unreadable expression. The lesson had been learned, not through discipline, but through a question. A crisis of a different kind emerged. Bruce Wayne was declared dead. It was a complex, multiversal event involving a time-traveling god of evil. The details are messy. The result was simple. Batman was gone. The world believed Bruce Wayne was dead, and Gotham City, a beast that constantly tested its master, began to stir. The mantle of the Bat was vacant. The symbol of fear was gone. Tim believed he was the logical successor. He had the skills, the mind, but he was still a teenager, grappling with his own grief and rage. Damian, of course, believed it was his birthright. The city was on the brink of a gang war, with Black Mask and the Penguin ready to carve it up. The GCPD was leaderless without Gordon's trust in Batman. Someone had to become Batman. The problem was, neither Tim nor Damian was ready. They were both brilliant, but one was too angry and the other was too Robin. I looked at the cowl, sitting in its case. The thought of putting it on made my skin crawl. It was Bruce's burden, his monster. But I also knew what he had built, what it meant to the city. It couldn't be a weapon for a vengeful boy or a throne for a princeling. It had to be a protector. With a heavy heart, I made a choice. I would not be Nightwing. I would become Batman. Putting on the Batsuit was one of the most alienating experiences of my life. The weight of it was more than physical. It was the weight of a legacy, of a city's fear, of my father's pain. The first time I looked in the mirror, I didn't see myself. I saw a ghost. I had to change it, make it my own. I modified the suit, adding more flexibility for my acrobatic style. I adjusted the cape, the gauntlets, but the biggest change was my partner. Tim was hurt, resentful. He saw my decision as a betrayal, a declaration that he wasn't good enough. He left for a time to find his own path. That left Damian. I went to him, not as Batman to Robin, but as Dick to Damian. I can't do this without you, I told him, and I meant it. I need a partner who knows the League's tactics, who isn't afraid of anything. I need you. I wasn't offering him a role. I was offering him a purpose. I was offering him the one thing he truly craved, respect and necessity. To everyone's shock, especially Alfred's, I made Damian Wayne the new Robin. The original boy wonder, now Batman, partnering with the son of Bruce Wayne. The press called us Batman and Robin Reborn. The criminals didn't know what to make of us. We were different. I was lighter on my feet, quicker to equip, even as Batman. And Robin was a tiny, terrifying force of nature who spoke in formal, deadly threats. Our first major case as the new dynamic duo was against Professor Pig, a deranged artist who turned people into mindless masked Dolatrons. It was grotesque, the kind of case that played on every primal fear. The old Batman would have descended like a nightmare, shattering Pig's operation through sheer terror. I couldn't do that. My Batman had to be a detective, a surgeon removing a cancer. Damian, however, was all for the League of Assassins solution. A swift decapitation is the most efficient cure for this plague, he stated, as if discussing pest control. We're here to save his victims, not just stop him, I countered, studying the map of the sewers Pig was using. Sentinels. 2, approaching from the east, Damian whispered, his focus absolute. I saw them, 2 hulking Dolatrons moving with an unnatural coordination. We disable them, non-lethally. I grappled up, using the shadows in a way that was all my own, less a demon, more a ghost. I took down the first with a precise nerve strike. Damian engaged the second. It was brutal, efficient, and far more violent than necessary, ending with the Dolatron's arm dislocated and its mask shattered. But the person underneath was alive. Sloppy, I said, landing beside him, but adequate. It was the closest I'd come to praise. And he stood a little straighter. We were finding our rhythm, a strange, dissonant, but effective melody. The ultimate test of our partnership was the return of the Black Mask, who had united the remnants of Gotham's mobs under his banner. He knew Batman was different. He'd heard the rumors that Bruce was dead. He sought to break the new bat by targeting the one thing he thought would be a weakness, the child wearing the R. He kidnapped Damian, not as Robin, but as Damian Wayne. He publicly revealed the boy's identity and had him strung up in the middle of Robinson Park, a target for every two-bit thug with a dream of taking down a Wayne. The message was clear: come and get him. This wasn't a criminal plot. It was a trap designed for a predator. The old Batman would have planned for days, accounting for every variable. I didn't have that luxury. Every second Damian was in the open was a second he could be killed. The rage I felt was a cold, sharp thing. It wasn't the hot anger of my youth. It was the focused fury of a protector. I suited up. Alfred tried to stop me. "Master Dick, it is a suicide mission." "I know," I said, my voice low and steady. "But he's my Robin." For the first time, I truly understood the weight Bruce carried. This was what it felt like when it was your child in the crosshairs. I didn't go in with a plan. I went in with a promise. I descended on Robinson Park, not like a bat, but like a storm. I didn't use stealth. I used fear, but it was my own brand, a furious, righteous anger. I moved through Black Mask's men like a whirlwind, my eskrima sticks cracking against skulls and limbs. I was faster than Bruce, more fluid, and in that moment more terrifying, because my violence was born of love, not vengeance. I reached the center of the park. Damian was tied to a large wooden frame, but he wasn't helpless. He'd already taken down 3 of his captors. His bonds loosened, his face a mask of bloody defiance. Black Mask stood before him, a gun pointed at his head. The new Batman. "I was wondering when you'd show up to collect the brat." I didn't speak. I just looked at him, and I saw the first flicker of doubt in his eyes. This wasn't the Batman he knew. This was something else. "He's not a brat," I said, my voice echoing with a calm that was more threatening than any roar. "He's my partner." In that split second, Damian spat a wad of blood in Black Mask's face. I threw an eskrima stick, knocking the gun from his hand. The fight was over in seconds. As I untied Damian, he looked up at me, his bravado gone, replaced by a raw, unguarded shock. "You came for me." It wasn't a question, it was a revelation. "Always," I said, and I meant it. The battle with Black Mask solidified our partnership. Damian stopped seeing the Robin mantle as a stepping stone to the Batman and started to embrace it as his own. He began, in his own stilted, bizarre way, to emulate me. He'd try to make quips mid-fight, though they usually came out as morbid observations or threats involving specific anatomical dismemberments. It was progress. We worked together for over a year. We carved out a new era for Gotham. It was a brighter time, strangely, with a lighter Batman and a deadly serious Robin. I learned to be a leader, a mentor, and in many ways a father. I understood Bruce in a way I never could have before. But all things end. Bruce Wayne returned, not from the dead, but from being lost in time. He came back to a Gotham that had moved on, that had been protected by a different Batman. The reunion was complicated. He was proud of me, of what I had accomplished, but the cowl was always his. It was his burden, his destiny. I handed it back to him without a second thought. The weight lifted from my shoulders was immense. I was ready to be Nightwing again. But Damian was conflicted. He had found a brother in me, a partnership that worked. Returning to Bruce, the stern biological father he barely knew, was a step backward. The day I packed away the batsuit for the last time, Damian stood in the cave watching me. "This is an inefficient restructuring," he stated, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. "It's going to be okay, Damian," I said. "He's your father, and I'm still your brother. That doesn't change." He gave a curt nod, but as I turned to leave, he spoke again, so quietly I almost missed it. "Thank you, Grayson." It was the closest I would ever get to an "I love you" from Damian Al Ghul Wayne. It was enough. Returning to Nightwing was like coming up for air after being submerged for too long. The blue symbol felt right on my chest again. Bloodhaven was still a mess, but it was my mess. I had a new perspective now. I had been Batman. I had carried the ultimate burden and survived. Nothing Bloodhaven could throw at me would ever feel that heavy again. My relationship with Bruce was finally, truly, one of equals. The old resentments had been burned away in the crucible of his absence. We were partners, brothers, and now fellow fathers to the same complicated, brilliant, and violent boy. I even reconnected with Tim, who had found his own identity as Red Robin. The Bat family was larger and more dysfunctional than ever, but it was a family. I stood on a rooftop in Bloodhaven, the wind whipping through my hair. Below, the city pulsed with life, with crime, with hope. I was Dick Grayson, the Flying Grayson, the Boy Wonder, Nightwing, Batman, the Grey Sun. I was all of them and none of them. I was the man who chose his own wings. I took a running start and leaped into the open air, a perfect dive into the city lights. There was no net. There never had been. But I wasn't falling. I was flying. Bloodhaven welcomed me back with its special brand of chaos. It was like I'd never left, just stepped out for a long coffee break. The familiar grime, the constant hum of desperation. It was almost comforting. But I was different. The year as Batman had sanded down my edges. I was more patient, more strategic. I saw the city not just as a problem to be solved with my fists, but as a system to be understood and carefully recalibrated. My first order of business was to rebuild my bridges with the BPD. Detective Amy Rohrbach had been promoted. She met me on a rooftop, her arms crossed, but there was a hint of a smile on her face. "Heard you got a promotion yourself. How was the big chair?" "Heavy," I said honestly. "You back for good, or is this a visit?" "I'm back, and I want to do things differently, more intel sharing, less unilateral action." She raised an eyebrow. "The Batman gig really did change you. All right, Nightwing, let's see if we can't clean up this toilet together." It felt like a fresh start, a real partnership. For the first time in a long time, the future in Bloodhaven looked not just like an endless fight, but like a place I could actually build something. My personal life also needed rebuilding. Barbara and I had to rediscover each other. The year I was Batman, our relationship had been put on hold, existing mostly as late-night comms chatter and shared worry. Our first real date in over a year was at her clock tower, surrounded by the soft glow of her servers. There was a new, cautious tension between us. "I missed you," I said, the simplicity of the words carrying the weight of everything we'd been through. "I missed you too," she replied, her hand finding mine. "But I also saw a part of you put on that cowl that worried me. You became so focused, so grim." "I had to," I said. "It was the only way to bear it." "I know, but you don't have to bear it alone. Not anymore." We talked for hours, not about cases or villains, but about us, about what we wanted. It was messy and uncertain, but it was real. The connection was still there, a bright, steady flame that hadn't been extinguished by the darkness. We were two people who had been shaped by tragedy and duty, trying to figure out if there was room for something more. That night, it felt like there was. The past, however, has a way of resurfacing. A new threat emerged in Gotham, one that targeted the very concept of legacy. A secret society called the Court of Owls. They were a myth, a nursery rhyme Bruce had investigated and dismissed. But they were real, and they had been watching my family for generations. Their agents, the Talons, were undead assassins, perfectly preserved and terrifyingly efficient. Batman was their primary target. But their interest in me was personal. They left a message for me in my Bloodhaven apartment, a small porcelain owl mask sitting on my pillow. A chill that had nothing to do with the open window went down my spine. The message was clear. "We know who you are, we know where you live, and your history is our business." I immediately contacted Bruce. His voice was grim. "I was wrong, Dick. The court is real. And they've been manipulating Gotham for centuries. They see themselves as the city's true rulers." "And what do they want with me?" I asked, my hand resting on the cold porcelain of the mask. "They have a particular interest in acrobats," Bruce said, and the line went cold. The Flying Graysons. It was never just an accident. My entire life, my greatest tragedy, was somehow connected to this ancient conspiracy. The foundation of my world was cracking. The court's interest in me was more than just historical. A Talon, faster and more skilled than any I'd ever faced, ambushed me in Bloodhaven. He moved with an eerie, familiar grace. His fighting style was a dark mirror of my own, all the acrobatic flair, but twisted into something lethal. "Hello, little bird," he rasped, his voice like dry leaves. "The court has big plans for you." We fought across the rooftops, a deadly ballet under the moonless sky. He was stronger than me, and he didn't feel pain. I realized I couldn't beat him with strength or skill alone. I had to outthink him. I led him to a construction site, using the unstable environment to my advantage. I baited him onto a crane, and with a well-placed explosive disc, I severed the cable, sending him plunging into a deep foundation pit filled with setting concrete. It was a temporary solution, but it bought me time. As I stood there, breathing heavily, I knew this wasn't a Bloodhaven problem. This was a family problem. I had to go back to Gotham. The Court of Owls wasn't just attacking Batman. They were attacking my origin, my very identity. To fight them, I had to be willing to tear down everything I thought I knew about myself. The Batcave had become a war room. Bruce, Tim, and even Damian were poring over centuries of data. The revelation was staggering. The Court of Owls had a long-standing tradition. They recruited from the circus. They sought out the most agile, the most gifted, to become their Talons. My great-grandfather was a suspected Talon. My grandparents were considered. The court had been watching the Flying Graysons for generations. They had chosen me. The sabotage of my parents' ropes. It wasn't just Zuko. The court had given the order. They had murdered my parents not as a message to the circus, but to break me, to make me a candidate for their reshaping. The grief I had carried since I was 8 years old was not a random tragedy. It was a calculated, cold-blooded assassination. The anger that rose in me was older and deeper than any I had ever felt. This wasn't the hot rage of a teenager. This was the icy, patient fury of a man who has just discovered his entire life is a lie. Bruce put a hand on my shoulder. "We will bring them down, Dick, for your parents." For the first time, the mission wasn't about justice for Gotham. It was personal, deeply, profoundly personal. The court's plan was audacious. They weren't just trying to kill Batman, they were trying to replace him. They had a Bruce Wayne Talon, a perfect physical duplicate, ready to take his place and hand Gotham over to them. They launched their final assault, unleashing an army of Talons on the city. The battle was city-wide, a silent, bloody war in the shadows. My specific target was the Talon who was meant for me, the one who had been intended to be my recruiter, the man responsible for my parents' death. His name was William Cobb, my great-grandfather. The fight was a nightmare. He knew every move I was going to make before I made it. He fought with the same style my father had taught me, but corrupted by the court's undead magic. "You were meant to be one of us, Richard," he hissed, his blade scraping against my eskrima sticks. "The grey son of Gotham, the perfect heir." "I'm nobody's heir," I grunted, flipping backward to gain distance. "I'm my own man." "You are a collection of our designs," he roared, pressing his attack. It was a psychological war as much as a physical one. He was trying to convince me that my free will was an illusion, that my entire life had been orchestrated. But he was wrong. They had shaped the circumstances, but every choice I made was my own. To become Robin, to become Nightwing, to become Batman, to be a hero. Those were my choices. The battle with Cobb reached its climax in the old Haley's Circus tent, which the court had re-erected in a Gotham warehouse as a sick tribute. It was a twisted recreation of my past. We fought on the high wire, above the hard ground. He was trying to reenact my parents' fall, to finally break me and claim me for the court. But I wasn't the scared boy hanging from a rope anymore. I was a man who had mastered fear. I used his own arrogance against him. He knew the quadruple somersault was a Grayson signature. He expected me to try it, so I didn't. I feigned the move, then at the last second changed my trajectory, using a grapple line to swing underneath the platform and come up behind him. It was a move he couldn't anticipate because it wasn't in the Grayson playbook. It was pure Nightwing. I drove an eskrima stick, charged with enough electricity to stun even his undead physiology, into his back. He spasmed and fell from the wire. I caught him with my grapple, leaving him dangling, trapped. I looked down at my great-grandfather, a relic of a poisonous legacy. "My choices are my own," I told him, my voice steady. "The story ends here. The Court of Owls was defeated, but the knowledge of their manipulation, the truth about my parents, was a new scar on my soul. Some mysteries once solved you wish had remained buried. In the aftermath of the Court of Owls, I needed space. The revelation that my life's greatest pain was a deliberate act, not a random tragedy, had left me unmoored. I took a leave of absence from the Titans and from Bloodhaven. I went back to the one place that still felt purely, uncomplicatedly good, Haley's Circus. It was on tour in Europe. I didn't go as Nightwing or Dick Grayson, heir to a morbid legacy. I just went as Dick. I helped put up tents, I tended to the animals, I even did a few simple aerial acts, not for the crowd, but for myself. The feeling of the bar in my hands, the rush of air, the simple physics of flight. It was a meditation. It cleansed me of the court's poison. One night, sitting by a campfire with Mr. Haley, the old man looked at me, his eyes full of a knowing sadness. "I always suspected, Dick," he said quietly. "There were men asking about your family for years. I thought they were scouts. I was a fool." "You weren't a fool," I said, staring into the flames. "You gave us a home. That was real. What they did, that doesn't taint what we had, what my parents had." He was right. The court had tried to own my story, but they didn't own my memories. The love, the joy, the light, that was all real, and it was mine. I returned to Bloodhaven with a renewed sense of purpose. The court had tried to define me by my past, but I had chosen my future. My relationship with Barbara deepened. We decided to try living together, splitting time between her clock tower in Gotham and my apartment in Bloodhaven. It was a logistical nightmare, but it was our nightmare. We were building a life, a real one, amidst the chaos. I even started mentoring again, not Damien. He was Bruce's project again, and their relationship was evolving. But a new hero had emerged in Bloodhaven, a young woman with electromagnetic powers who called herself Pulse. She was raw, powerful, and unsure of herself. She reminded me of myself at that age, all potential and no direction. I started training her, not as a sidekick, but as a protégé. I taught her control, tactics, and most importantly, the why. Why we put on the mask. It felt good to pass on the lessons, not the legacy. To teach hope, not vengeance. For the first time, I could look at the next generation and not see a reflection of my own pain. I saw possibility. Now, as I stand here on my favorite Bloodhaven rooftop, the city is still a mess. There will always be another blockbuster, another cartel, another crisis. But I'm not the same man who fought here before. I've been Robin, the boy wonder. I've been Nightwing, the solo hero. I've been Batman, the Dark Knight. I've been the Grey Sun, the intended heir to a nightmare. And I've been Dick Grayson, the man who loves Barbara Gordon and tries to do the right thing. All those identities are layers of who I am, but none of them define me. I am the sum of my choices. I chose to rise from tragedy. I chose to be a hero. I chose to leave and find my own path. I chose to come back and bear the heaviest burden. I chose love. The wind picks up, tugging at my cape. Below, the city calls, a siren song of trouble and hope. I take a breath, feeling the familiar thrill of the leap to come. The story isn't over. It will never be over. But it's my story, and I'm ready for the next chapter. I dive off the ledge, a streak of blue and black against the neon sky. I'm not falling, I'm flying. Peace, in our line of work, is a relative term. It's not the absence of conflict, but the quiet space between storms. For a few months, that space felt expansive. Bloedhaven's crime rate dipped to a record low. My partnership with the BPD, spearheaded by the now Captain Amy Rohrbach, was yielding real, tangible results. We were dismantling drug pipelines, freezing assets, putting mid-level bosses behind bars. It was good, honest, grinding police work, just with a costumed consultant. Barbara and I had settled into a rhythm. Mornings in Bloedhaven, evenings in Gotham, nights spent patrolling our respective cities, connected by a silent, open comms line. It was as close to normal as our lives could get. I even had time to take Pulse, my protégé, under my wing for more structured training. Her real name was Leah, and she was a quick study, her control over her powers growing every day. This was the life I had fought for, a life of purpose, of connection, of making a difference without being consumed by the darkness. I should have known it was too good to last. The storm began with a whisper, a name circulating in the underworld with a mixture of fear and reverence. The judge. There were no witnesses, no demands, no grandstanding, just bodies, high-profile criminals, a corrupt city councilman, a slumlord, a gang leader were being executed. Single gunshot, clinically precise, no forensic evidence, just a single stark calling card left at each scene, a small wooden figurine of a judge, gavel in hand. The Bloedhaven PD was, unofficially, relieved. The city's scum was being scoured, but it made my skin crawl. This wasn't justice, it was a purge, and purges have a way of expanding their definition of guilty. I tried to warn Rohrbach. This isn't a solution, Amy, it's a cancer. It starts with them, but it never ends there. She sighed, rubbing her temples. I know, Nightwing. But try telling that to the folks in the neighborhoods these bastards terrorized. They're calling this the judge a hero. That was the most dangerous part. He was being welcomed, and a welcomed monster is the hardest kind to stop. My first encounter with the judge was a lesson in frustration. I tracked him to a dockside warehouse where he was targeting a smuggler named Finn O'Malley. I moved silently through the rafters, the way I had as a boy. A ghost in the steelwork. I saw him before he saw me. He was just a silhouette, lean and efficient, perched on a crane gantry, a high-powered rifle assembled and aimed. There was no malice in his posture, no rage, just cold, dispassionate purpose. I dropped down behind him. It's over. Stand down. He didn't even startle. He slowly lowered the rifle and turned. He wore a featureless black mask and tactical gear. No insignia. Nightwing, he said, his voice electronically modulated, flat. You are an obstacle. This isn't justice. This is murder. The law is a leash on the righteous, he replied. I am cutting the leash. He was fast. He didn't try to shoot me. He used the rifle as a club, closing the distance with startling speed. We fought, a brutal close-quarters exchange. He was well-trained, a blend of military CQC and something else, something more esoteric. He wasn't trying to kill me, just incapacitate me. He landed a solid blow to my ribs and used the opening to vanish into the maze of shipping containers, leaving me with nothing but the ache in my side and the chilling certainty that I was facing a new kind of fanatic. The investigation into the judge became my obsession. Bruce ran the face and voice modulations through his global databases. Nothing. Tim dug into the financials of the victims, looking for a common thread beyond their criminality. Barbara scoured every dark web forum. We found nothing. He was a ghost. The only pattern was his targets. They were all undeniably guilty, the kind of people the system often failed to punish adequately. He was playing to the public's deepest frustrations, casting himself as the solution the police and costumed do-gooders could never be. The pressure mounted. A city councilwoman, one of the few clean politicians in Bloedhaven, gave a speech condemning vigilante violence, but was drowned out by a crowd chanting, "Let the judge decide." I felt the city slipping away from me. My methods, arrest, evidence, due process, were starting to look weak, inefficient. Even Leah Pulse questioned me after a training session. I mean, the people he's killing are monsters. Isn't the world better off without them? I looked at her, this bright, powerful kid, and saw the seductive simplicity of the judge's philosophy taking root. The moment we decide who deserves to live and die, Leah, we become the monsters, every single time. The break came from an unexpected source. Damien. He'd been reviewing the case files, something to do during a slow week in Gotham. He sent me a terse message. The figurines, the wood. It is mahogany, a specific, rare subspecies. There are only 3 importers on the eastern seaboard. It was a brilliant piece of deduction, the kind of obsessive detail only a Wayne would think to check. I followed the lead. It led me to a high-end, custom woodworking shop in the nicer part of Bloodhaven. The owner, a quiet, unassuming man named Elias Janssen, was shocked when I confronted him. He recognized the figurine. "I made that," he said, his hands trembling, "for a man named Alistair Cray. He's a philanthropist, a patron of the arts. He commissioned a whole set of them, said they were for a charity auction. Alistair Cray. The name meant nothing to the criminal databases. He was a ghost with a public face, a wealthy, reclusive man who donated to hospitals and museums. The perfect cover. The monster wasn't hiding in the shadows. He was hiding in plain sight. Alistair Cray's estate was a fortress of old money and modern security. Getting in required a plan more subtle than my usual rooftop approach. This called for Dick Grayson, socialite. I put on a suit I hadn't worn in years, used a Wayne Enterprises cover story about a potential donation to the Bloodhaven Museum of Art, and waltzed right through the front gate. Cray was a handsome man in his late 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a calm, persuasive demeanor. His home was a gallery of beautiful, violent art, paintings of revolutions, sculptures of warriors. "Mr. Grayson," he said, shaking my hand with a firm grip. "A pleasure. I must admit I'm more familiar with your Guardian's philanthropic work." We made small talk about art and charity. He was charming, erudite, and I saw right through him. It was in the way his eyes lingered on a painting of a stern, mythological judge passing sentence. It was in the absolute, unshakable certainty in his voice when he spoke about moral clarity. He wasn't a madman. He was a zealot. He believed with every fiber of his being that he was right, and that made him more dangerous than any thug I'd ever faced. I couldn't arrest him. I had no evidence. A hunch and a woodcarver's testimony wouldn't hold up. I needed him to confess. I needed to catch him in the act. I planted bugs in his study during the tour of his home. For days, we listened. He was careful. He never discussed his work as the judge, but we heard enough. He held court in his study, ranting to himself about the sickness of the city, the failure of modern morality. He saw himself as a surgeon, cutting out the rot. Barbara tracked his financials and found a shell company that had purchased a specific type of armor-piercing round, the same kind used in the murders. It was all circumstantial, but it was a pattern. The final piece came when he mentioned a name over a glass of brandy, talking to his own reflection. Mayor Henderson, the man who rezoned the West End for his developer friends, the man who let those tenements collapse. His judgment is overdue. We had our target, and we had our trap. The night of the mayor's annual charity gala, the air was thick with tension. We knew Cray would strike. The publicity, the symbolism, it was too perfect for him. Mayor Henderson was a corrupt, venal man, but he was also the elected leader of the city. His public execution would be the judge's masterpiece. I was inside the gala, once again in a tux, blending with the crowd. Batman and Robin were positioned on adjacent rooftops, a silent, looming presence. Pulse was my eyes in the sky, using her EM senses to scan for any unusual energy signatures. The moment came during the mayor's speech. A single pane of the massive stained glass window at the back of the hall shattered. Not from a bullet, but from a precise, localized charge. A grappling line shot through the hole, and the judge, in full tactical gear, rappelled down into the center of the screaming, panicked crowd. He raised his pistol, aiming for the podium. "Mayor Henderson, your sins have found you out." I was already moving. I didn't throw a batarang. I threw a champagne flute. It was closer, Faster, it shattered against his wrist, spoiling his aim. The shot went wide, embedding itself in the wall. The gala descended into chaos. The fight that followed was a nightmare. We were in a crowded, panicked ballroom. Cray was a whirlwind of violence, using terrified civilians as shields, his movements precise and ruthless. He wasn't trying to kill me. He was still trying to get a clear shot at the cowering mayor. "You protect this filth," he snarled, blocking my eskrima strike. "You are part of the sickness." "I protect the process," I yelled back, driving a knee into his gut. "Something you gave up on." Batman descended from the ceiling, a black avalanche of force. Robin came through a side door, a tiny, furious blur. We had him surrounded, but Cray was prepared. He activated an EMP device on his belt. The lights died. The comms fizzed into static. In the pitch black, illuminated only by emergency exit signs, he was in his element. He'd trained for this. He used the darkness and the panic to his advantage, slipping through our net. I heard Pulse cry out as he used some kind of sonic device to disorient her. I lost sight of him. He was gone. He'd escaped, right from under our noses. We had failed, in front of the entire city. The aftermath was a public relations disaster. The media crucified us. Bat Family fails to stop assassin. Is the judge untouchable? Mayor Henderson, playing the victim, used the event to call for stricter anti-vigilante laws. The public sentiment, which had been leaning towards the judge, now solidified. We were the bungling cops. He was the efficient solution. Back in the clock tower, the mood was grim. Barbara was frustrated, her screens a torrent of negative press. Tim was running through the footage, analyzing every move Cray made. Damien was characteristically blunt. We were inefficient. We allowed the environment to dictate the engagement. Bruce was silent, staring at the city skyline. I was the most frustrated of all. I had been so close. I had looked into his eyes. I understood his motive, his pathology, and I had still let him get away. He had outsmarted us. He had used our own rules, the rule against collateral damage, the rule to protect life, as a weapon against us. He had proven his point, that our way was weak. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of doubt. Was he right? The doubt was a poison, and it seeped into everything. My next few patrols were messy. I was harder on the street-level thugs I caught, my quips replaced with a cold silence. I was second-guessing every decision. When a drug dealer pulled a knife, I didn't just disarm him. I broke his wrist. The sound of the bones snapping echoed in the silent alley, and the look of pure terror on his face shocked me back to myself. What was I doing? This wasn't me. This was Cray's influence. I was letting him win by becoming more like him. I swung back to my apartment, the wind doing little to clear my head. Barbara was waiting for me, her expression unreadable. She'd heard the comms traffic, the silence, the sound of the brake. "Talk to me, Dick," she said, her voice soft but firm. I couldn't look at her. "He got in my head, Babs. He made me wonder if maybe, just maybe, the world needs a cleaner, more permanent solution." "No," she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. "The world needs Dick Grayson. It needs your hope. Don't you dare let that man steal that from you. That's the only victory he can really have." We had to change tactics. Cray had proven he could counter our standard operating procedure. We needed to understand his endgame. Bruce, using his most paranoid labyrinthine logic, theorized that Cray wasn't just purging criminals, he was creating a power vacuum, a very specific, controlled vacuum. "He's not a revolutionary," Bruce stated, his face illuminated by the Bat-computer's glow. "He's a replacement. He's removing the old, corrupt power structure to install a new one, his own." Barbara cross-referenced the list of Cray's victims with city contracts, development deals, and political alliances. A pattern emerged. Each person he eliminated was a rival or an obstacle to a shell corporation that traced back to one of Cray's charitable foundations. He wasn't just the judge, he was the heir. He was systematically assassinating his way to control over Blüdhaven's underworld and its legitimate economy. His next target became obvious: Salvatore Maroni, the imprisoned but still influential head of the remnants of the Maroni crime family. With Salvatore gone, the last major obstacle to Cray's complete dominion would be removed. The prison transport was moving him to a new, more secure facility tomorrow. It was the perfect opportunity. The plan was simple, a classic pincer movement. We wouldn't wait for him at the prison. We'd hit the transport en route. Batman would take the lead vehicle. Robin and I would flank from the sides. Pulse would be our overwatch, using her powers to disrupt any electronic countermeasures Cray might deploy. We had the element of surprise, or so we thought. The convoy moved through the industrial district. The air was thick with the promise of rain. My heart was a drum in my chest. This was it. We had to stop him. As the transport entered a long underpass, Pulse's voice crackled over the comm. "I've got a problem. A huge EM surge. It's jamming my senses. It's coming from—" The comm died. The lights in the underpass flickered and died, plunging us into near-total darkness. It was a trap. He hadn't come for the transport. He had come for us. From the shadows of the support pillars, figures emerged. Not just Cray. An entire squad of masked operatives, armed and moving with the same chilling efficiency. He hadn't been working alone. He had built an army. The fight in the underpass was pure chaos. We were outnumbered and outmaneuvered. Cray's disciples were fanatics, well-armed and unafraid to die. They fought with a synchronized, almost religious fervor. I saw Robin, a whirlwind of motion, taking down 3 at once, but a 4th caught him with a taser net, pinning him to the ground. Batman was a fortress, but even he was being slowly overwhelmed by the sheer volume of fire and coordinated attacks. I was fighting my way toward Damien when Cray himself stepped in front of me. He wasn't in his full judge gear tonight. He wore a dark, tailored suit under a tactical vest, like a businessman going to war. "It's over, Nightwing. Your era of hesitant justice is at an end. I'm building a new city from the ashes of the old." "There won't be a city left if you burn it all down," I yelled, launching myself at him. Our fight was different this time, more personal. He knew my style now, and I knew his. It was a brutal chess match of feints and counters. He was stronger, fueled by his conviction. I was faster, fueled by the need to protect my family. I landed a solid kick to his chest, sending him stumbling back. But it was a Pyrrhic victory. I heard a cry of pain. I turned to see Pulse fall from her perch on the overpass, her suit flickering. Struck by a concentrated EM pulse from one of Cray's devices. We were losing. Badly. Retreat is not a word in the Batman lexicon. But sometimes survival is the only victory. It was Batman who made the call. A smoke pellet, larger than any I'd ever seen, erupted in the center of the underpass, followed by a series of concussive grenades. In the resulting confusion, he grabbed the trapped Robin, I grabbed the stunned Pulse, and we broke contact. It was a rout. We escaped to a secondary safe house, a dusty, forgotten apartment above a closed butcher shop. The mood was funereal. Robin was seething, humiliated. Pulse was unconscious, her vitals stable, but weak. Batman was a statue of silent fury, analyzing the footage from our cowl cams. He anticipated every move. Tim's voice came over a backup comm, shaky. "He's been studying us for longer than we thought." I slumped against a wall, sliding down to the floor. My suit was torn, my body ached, and the taste of defeat was bitter in my mouth. Cray hadn't just beaten us in a fight. He had proven his philosophy superior in the field. He was organized, efficient, and ruthless. We were a fractured family, clinging to an outdated code. For the first time, I truly felt like we might not be able to win this. In the quiet of the safe house, as Alfred remotely guided me through treating Pulse's injuries, a memory surfaced. Not from my time as Robin, but from the circus. A high-wire act had gone wrong, not from sabotage, but from a sudden, unexpected gust of wind. The net was there, but the timing was off. My father, instead of trying to fight the wind, had used it. He had shifted his weight, altered his spin, and turned a potential disaster into a moment of breathtaking, improvised beauty. "He's reading our playbook," I said aloud, breaking the heavy silence. Bruce turned from the computer. "Explain." "He knows how we think. He knows Batman always takes the point. He knows Robin flanks. He knows Nightwing provides agile support. He knows we have an Overwatch. He built his entire strategy around countering us. We can't beat him by being better Batman, Robin, and Nightwing. We have to be something he can't predict." I looked at Bruce, then at the recovering Pulse, then at the still fuming Damian. "We have to stop being the Bat family, just for one night. We have to be something else entirely." The new plan was insane. It was the antithesis of everything Bruce had ever taught me. It was chaotic, unpredictable, and relied entirely on trust. We wouldn't go after Cray directly. We would go after his foundation, his money, his public face. While he was looking for the Dark Knight, the light would burn his house down. Bruce, using every ounce of his Bruce Wayne influence, initiated a cascade of SEC investigations, IRS audits, and hostile corporate takeovers of Cray's shell companies. It was economic warfare, a silent, brutal assault on his financial infrastructure. Barbara, as Oracle, launched a digital blitz, leaking every piece of dirty data she could find on Cray's philanthropy, turning his public image from a benevolent patron to a suspected criminal. It was a war of information. And my team, we weren't going to fight his army. We were going to dismantle it, but not by force. My part of the plan was the riskiest. I went in alone, not as Nightwing, but as Dick Grayson. I targeted the families of Cray's disciples, not to threaten them, to save them. Using Barbara's intel, I found a disciple's sister who was being evicted. I called in a favor, got her a loan, stopped the eviction. I found another one's father, who was deep in debt to a loan shark. I anonymously paid off the debt. I visited a third one's mother in the hospital, a victim of a hit-and-run that Cray's first victim, the slumlord, had caused. I didn't mention her son. I just sat with her, as a volunteer, and listened. I was sowing seeds of doubt. I was showing them that there was another way to fix the world, that the system, for all its flaws, could still be made to work for the little guy. It was slow, painstaking work. It felt insignificant against Cray's grand, violent design. But I was betting everything on the power of a single, inconvenient truth, that most people deep down don't want to be soldiers in a holy war. They just want their families to be safe. The crack in Cray's armor appeared days later. One of his disciples, the one whose mother I visited, failed to report for duty. Then another. The whispers had started. Cray's response was predictably brutal. He publicly executed the two deserters, broadcasting it on the dark web as a sentence for treason. He thought it would cement his control. It was his fatal mistake. He had turned his judgment on his own. The fear that bound his army began to curdle into paranoia. The following night, when we moved on his primary compound, a fortified charity headquarters, the fight was different. We didn't use our standard formation. I led the assault, using acrobatics so unpredictable they were closer to my circus days than my crime fighting. Batman provided long-range, non-lethal sniper support, a role he never takes. Robin and Pulse worked as a single disruptive unit, her EM pulses shorting out their tech while his martial arts took them down. We were an unpredictable storm, and Cray's army, once a well-oiled machine, was faltering. Some fought. Others simply laid down their arms and surrendered. The spell was broken. I found Alistair Cray in his pent office, overlooking the city he had tried to conquer. He was alone, his suit immaculate, a single glass of amber liquid in his hand. He wasn't trying to escape. "You didn't win, Grayson," he said, not turning around. "You just proved that chaos and sentimentality will always triumph over order and justice." "There's no justice without humanity," I said, stepping into the room. "You forgot the human part." He finally turned. The absolute certainty was gone from his eyes, replaced by a hollow, furious disappointment. "I offered them purity, and they chose this." He gestured to the city below, with all its messy, complicated, beautiful life. "They chose hope," I said. As the GCPD swarmed the building below, led by a vindicated Captain Rohrbach, I watched them take Cray away. He didn't resist. He was a man who had built a perfect, terrible machine, only to watch it be dismantled by the one thing he could never account for: a simple act of kindness. We had won, not by being better soldiers, but by being better people. And as the sun began to rise over Bludhaven for the first time in weeks, I felt the weight lift. The doubt was gone. My way, our way, was the right one. It was the only one that left a city worth saving. Victory against Cray felt different. It wasn't a return to the status quo, but a hardening of resolve. Bludhaven had been tested, and the parts of it that mattered had held firm. My partnership with the BPD was stronger than ever. Pulse had recovered, her confidence forged in the fire of that brutal fight. She wasn't just my protégée anymore. She was a hero in her own right. Barbara and I found a new rhythm, a deeper understanding born from navigating that crisis together. We started talking about the future again, about maybe finding a permanent home, a place that was ours, not just a midpoint between our two battlefields. For a few months, life was good. It was a sustained, quiet hum of contentment I hadn't known was possible. I even managed to have a civil, almost warm dinner with Bruce, Damien, and Tim at the Manor, where the conversation actually strayed from tactical analysis to baseball. It was bizarre and wonderful. I should have known the other shoe was about to drop. It always does. The call came in the dead of night, a priority alert from the Justice League. It wasn't a mission brief. It was a distress signal from outer space. A deep space monitoring station, one of Superman's pet projects, had gone silent. Then, a fragmented, screaming transmission. "It's in the walls! The dark! It's rewriting everything!" Followed by coordinates that placed the source not at the station, but light years away, in a sector of space that was supposed to be empty. A shiver, one that had nothing to do with the Gotham chill, went down my spine. This wasn't an alien invasion. It felt different, older. The League was scrambling a team. Superman, Green Lantern, Martian Manhunter, the heavy hitters. Batman was going to coordinate from the Watchtower. He wanted me there too. "Your experience with non-standard threats could be valuable," he said over the comm, his voice grim. "The Court of Owls, the Psycho Pirate. You have a flexibility the others sometimes lack." I looked at Barbara, at the life we were building. I knew what my answer had to be. "I'm on my way." The Watchtower was a hive of controlled panic. Screens displayed the garbled transmission on a loop, alongside sensor data that made no sense. The space around the coordinates wasn't empty. It was wrong. Physics seemed to be breaking down. "It's a tear," John Johns stated, his red eyes narrowed in concentration. "A rupture in the fabric of reality itself, and it's expanding." Superman's face was a mask of uncharacteristic worry. "The energy signature is like nothing I've ever seen. It's not Kryptonian, not Thanagarian, it's ancient." They had a plan. A small, fast ship, the Star Racer, would jump to the edge of the anomaly. The team would investigate, try to find the source of the transmission and assess the threat. I was to be part of the boarding party, along with John Stewart, the Green Lantern. Our job was tactical assessment and, if necessary, evacuation. As we suited up, John looked at me. "You ever done anything like this, Nightwing? Fought a universe-level threat or boarded a possibly reality-warping spaceship?" I forced a grin. "There's a first time for everything." The humor felt thin, a fragile shield against the yawning unknown. The jump was nauseating. It wasn't a smooth transition through hyperspace. It was a violent lurch, like being pulled through a keyhole. One moment, the starfield was normal. The next, we were elsewhere. The space outside the viewport was a swirling vortex of colors that shouldn't exist. Purple and green nebulas bled into each other. Stars pulsed with a sickly, rhythmic light. And in the center of it all was the station, or what was left of it. The Thanagarian Deep Space Monitoring Post was now a grotesque sculpture of itself, its metal twisted into impossible, non-Euclidean shapes, glowing with that same wrong light. Life signs? Superman asked, his voice tight. John focused. I cannot tell. The psychic noise is overwhelming. It's like a scream from a million voices. We docked, the metallic clang of the airlock echoing in a way that felt muffled, dead. The interior was worse. The corridors weren't just damaged, they were wrong. A hallway would stretch into infinity one moment, then loop back on itself the next. Gravity shifted without warning. And the walls, they seemed to be made of shifting dark matter, and sometimes, if you stared too long, you could see faces staring back. We found the crew, or what the anomaly had turned them into. They were still alive, their bodies fused with the station's structure, their mouths open in silent screams. They were part of the ship now, their consciousness stretched and shattered, broadcasting that psychic scream John had felt. It was the most horrifying thing I had ever seen. "This is a plague," John Stewart whispered, his ring glowing brightly, creating a bubble of stable reality around us. A plague on reality itself. We pressed on, toward the source of the energy signature, the heart of the station. The laws of physics became suggestions. I had to rely entirely on my acrobatic instincts, leaping across gaps that shouldn't exist, navigating floors that became ceilings. My training meant nothing here. It was pure survival. We reached the core chamber. And there, floating in the center of a maelstrom of chaotic energy, was the source. It wasn't a machine, it wasn't a creature, it was a concept given form, a shifting, swirling mass of absolute nothingness. The absence. The absence didn't speak. It communicated directly into our minds, a wave of pure nihilistic thought. Existence is anomaly, a flaw in the silence. We are the correction, the uncreation. It showed us its purpose. It wasn't invading, it was erasing. It moved from universe to universe, unmaking them, returning them to the pristine void that existed before the Big Bang. This station, this sector of space, was just the beginning of the infection in our reality. Superman tried to reason with it. Green Lantern tried to contain it with a construct of pure will. Martian Manhunter tried to soothe its psychic storm. It was useless. Their efforts were simply unmade. The absence absorbed Superman's heat vision, unraveled John's constructs, and reflected John's telepathy back at him, causing him to cry out in pain. I stood there, my Eskrima sticks feeling like children's toys. What could I do against this? I was just a man who fought thugs in alleys. This was so far beyond my pay grade it was laughable, but as I watched my friends, the most powerful beings on the planet, be systematically neutralized, a memory flickered, not from Batman. From the circus, a high-wire act. The key wasn't fighting the wind or the sway of the rope. The key was balance, accepting the instability and making it a part of your dance. This thing, the absence, was the ultimate instability. It was the end of all dance. It couldn't be fought. It could only be balanced. "Stop!" I yelled, my voice swallowed by the psychic roar. I stepped forward, lowering my weapons. I opened my arms, a gesture of surrender, of acceptance. "You're right." The psychic assault paused, as if puzzled. Acknowledgement. "Existence is chaotic. It's messy. It's painful," I said, pouring every ounce of my own pain into the thought. My parents' death, Jason's loss, the weight of the cowl, the doubt Cray had sown. But it's also beautiful. It's the feeling of flight. It's the taste of a perfect burger. It's the sound of someone you love laughing. You can't have the silence without first having the song. You can't have the absence without first having the presence. I was throwing a Hail Mary pass with my soul. I was offering it the one thing its nihilistic philosophy couldn't account for, the value of the flawed, temporary, beautiful mess of being alive. For a terrifying moment, nothing happened. The absence hung in the void, a hole in reality. Then something shifted. The chaotic energy around it stuttered. It was like a computer processing a paradox. I had given it a concept it couldn't unmake, meaning. Its entire purpose was to erase, to return to nothing. but I had presented it with the idea that the something it was erasing had intrinsic, illogical, emotional value, a value that could only exist because of its temporary nature. The swirling void began to contract, the colors bleeding away, the psychic scream fading to a whisper. The floor has a name, it thought, its voice now faint, confused. It has billions of names, I said softly, and every single one is worth protecting. With a final silent implosion, the absence vanished. The station around us groaned, the wrong geometry slowly, painfully, beginning to right itself. The crew, fused into the walls, took one last, collective breath and were still, finally, at peace. We stood in the sudden, shocking silence. We had won, not by force, but by philosophy, by hope. The return to Earth was quiet. The League debriefing was a somber affair. We had faced the end of everything and had barely survived by the skin of our teeth and an argument about metaphysics. The world would never know how close it came to being unwritten. Superman placed a hand on my shoulder after the meeting. "What you did out there, Dick, that wasn't tactics, that was wisdom. We needed that, I needed that." It was high praise, but it felt hollow. The memory of those fused bodies, that psychic scream, was burned into my mind. I had looked into the heart of nothingness and argued for the value of a single human life, and I had won. But the cost of that knowledge was a new kind of weight. The problems of Bloodhaven, of Gotham, even of my own past, now seemed both insignificant and infinitely more precious. I didn't go back to patrol that night. I went to the one place that always grounded me. I found Barbara in the clock tower, not at her computers, but by the large window, watching the city lights. She turned as I entered, and she knew. She always knows. She didn't ask for details. She just opened her arms. I held on to her, burying my face in her hair, breathing in the scent of her shampoo, the coffee on her desk, the faint ozone of her equipment, the smells of life, of messy, complicated, beautiful life. "We're so small, Babs," I whispered, "and the universe is so dark." She pulled back, her hands on my face, her eyes fierce. "No, we're not small. We're the reason the dark hasn't won. You proved that today. You're a spark, Dick Grayson. And don't you ever forget that a single spark is enough to light up the whole damn sky." I looked at her, at the city she loved, at the life we were building together. The absence was wrong. Existence wasn't a flaw, it was a miracle, and I was going to spend the rest of my life fighting for it. Not as a soldier, not as a dark knight, but as a man who still believed in hope. The cosmic horror of the absence left a permanent mark on my soul, a sobering perspective that colored everything. Bloodhaven's problems felt both trivial and sacred. I threw myself into the work with a renewed, almost spiritual fervor. It wasn't just about stopping crime, it was about nurturing the fragile flame of community. I started spending more time on the ground, not just as Nightwing, but as Dick Grayson, volunteering at community centers, talking to kids, rebuilding the trust that Cray had tried to shatter. Pulse, Leah, was by my side, her powers now used as much for rebuilding as for fighting. Welding supports for a new playground, restoring power to a blacked-out neighborhood. We were becoming part of the city's foundation, not just its shield. This quiet, purposeful work was its own reward. But a familiar shadow was lengthening over Gotham, and it was about to pull me back in. The call was from Tim. His voice was strained, laced with a fear I rarely heard from him. "Dick, you need to come to Gotham. Now. It's Bruce." I was there in under an hour. The Batcave was colder than usual. Bruce was at the computer, but he wasn't the focused, brooding presence I knew. He was gaunt. His movements were jerky, his eyes sunken and burning with a feverish intensity. He was muttering to himself, strings of data and names that made no sense. "He hasn't slept in 92 hours, Alfred said, his voice heavy with exhaustion and worry. "He's chasing a ghost, a rumor, a myth called the Zuran R Protocol. He believes it's a key to ultimate victory. It's consuming him." I approached him carefully. "Bruce, you need to rest." He spun around, his eyes wild. "There's no time. They're everywhere, Dick, in the walls. The court was just the beginning. The Joker, Bane, Raz, they're all pieces of a larger design. I have to see the pattern." This was more than obsession. This was a breakdown. The weight of a lifetime of war, the recent cosmic threats, it had all finally cracked the world's strongest mind. We learned the terrible truth. This wasn't just stress. This was an attack. A new villain, a psychic parasite called the Batman of Zur-En-Arrh, had been unleashed. It wasn't a person, it was a backup personality Bruce had created years ago, a fail-safe designed to operate if his mind was ever broken, a Batman without Bruce Wayne's humanity. But it had been corrupted, weaponized. It was now a rogue program living in his subconscious, feeding on his paranoia, systematically deleting his memories and rebuilding him as a pure, ruthless and unstable engine of vengeance. We were too late to stop the initial infection. The Bruce we knew was being erased from the inside out. The Batman that remained was a stranger, more dangerous than any foe we had ever faced. He saw us not as allies, but as variables in a corrupted equation. As threats to his mission, the Bat family was now the primary target. The first strike was swift and brutal. He took down the GCPD's comms network, framing Oracle for the cyber attack. He then systematically dismantled our safe houses, our weapon caches, our financial resources. He knew everything. He had built it all. Fighting him was a nightmare. He anticipated our every move because he had taught us those moves. He used our own tactics against us. He took down Tim with a modified version of his own bow staff technique. He trapped Barbara by exploiting a backdoor in her system she didn't know existed. He outmaneuvered Damien by using the boy's own aggression against him. I faced him on the roof of Wayne Tower. He moved with Bruce's power, but none of his restraint. "You are a sentimental attachment, Grayson," he growled, his voice a distorted echo of the man I called father. "A flaw in the system. I am here to correct you." Our fight was the most brutal of my life. It was like fighting a mirror that showed only my failures. He broke 2 of my ribs and dislocated my shoulder before I managed to escape, bleeding and broken. We were losing. We were being hunted by our own foundation, cornered in a derelict subway tunnel, licking our wounds. The mood was one of despair. "How do we fight him?" Tim asked, his voice hollow. "He's Batman." "No," I said, the word a spark in the darkness. "He's not. He's a ghost, a corrupted ideal. Bruce built him, but we know Bruce. We're his family. That's the variable this thing can't compute." Our plan was insane. We wouldn't fight the Batman of Zur-En-Arrh. We would perform a psychic rescue mission. We had to go into the ruins of Bruce's mind and pull him back to the surface. It was a job for Martian Manhunter, but John was off-world. Our only hope was a volatile, unpredictable ally, John Constantine. He was a bastard, but he was the best there was at navigating the infernal and the internal. We found him in a pub in London, already 3 sheets to the wind. "A rescue mission into the Bat's noggin?" he slurred, lighting a cigarette. "You lot have a death wish. I like it. Let's go." The journey into Bruce's mind was a descent into a waking nightmare. It wasn't a landscape of memories, but a shattered Gothic cityscape built from his trauma. The alley where his parents died was a canyon that split the world. The shadows whispered with the voices of every rogue he'd ever faced, and at the center of it all was the Batman of Zur-En-Arrh, a king in a castle of fear, a figure of purple and yellow, a garish, insane perversion of the Batman symbol. We fought through phantoms, through memories twisted into monsters. We saw a young Dick Grayson, happy and whole, get erased by a wave of static. We saw Jason Todd's death play on a loop. We saw Barbara fall over and over. It was a gallery of his greatest failures, curated by his own broken psyche. Constantine held a magical barrier, his face beaded with sweat. "This is worse than hell. At least down there, the torment has a point. This is just pain for its own sake." Our goal was the heart of the castle, the memory of the pearl necklace, the last thing Bruce saw before his world ended. It was the core of his humanity. We found him, Bruce Wayne, not Batman, chained in the deepest dungeon of his own mind. He was frail, translucent, flickering. The Batman of Zur-En-Arrh stood over him, a scalpel of pure will in its hand, ready to make the final cut. "The mission requires the removal of this weakness," it intoned. "No!" I shouted, stepping forward. The creature turned its blank, cowled gaze on me. "The first Robin, the original flaw." "I'm not a flaw," I said, walking toward it, ignoring the psychic agony screaming through my own mind. "I'm his son, and you can't have him." I did the one thing Batman would never do. I dropped my eskrima sticks. I opened my arms. "Bruce," I said, my voice breaking, "I know you're in there. I know it hurts. But we need you. I need you. Damien needs you. Don't let the pain win. Come home." The Batman of Zur-En-Arrh lunged, but in that split second, the chained Bruce looked up. His eyes met mine, and a single clear word cut through the psychic storm. "Dick!" It was the crack we needed. The Batman of Zur-En-Arrh faltered, its form flickering. Bruce was fighting back from the inside. "Now, you bloody parasite!" Constantine yelled, throwing a handful of enchanted sand. The magical energy didn't attack the creature. It fortified Bruce. It was a battle of wills inside a collapsing mind. We couldn't fight for him. We could only lend him our strength. I poured every memory I had of our family into that connection. Christmas at the manor, Alfred's scones, Barbara's laugh, Damien's grudging respect, Tim's brilliant deductions, the good times, the human times. The Batman of Zur-En-Arrh screamed, a sound of tearing data and dying code. "Sentiment weakness!" Bruce, fueled by our memories, rose to his feet. He looked at the monster he had created. "No," he said, his voice his own again, filled with a terrible, weary strength. "That's the one thing you'll never understand. That's not our weakness. It's our only true strength." He reached out and, with a final, monumental effort of will, unmade it. We woke up in the real world, gasping on the cold floor of the Batcave. Bruce was unconscious but breathing steadily. The feverish light was gone from his eyes. He was just a man, exhausted and broken, but whole. The recovery was slow. The psychological scars ran deep. For the first time in his life, Bruce Wayne was truly vulnerable. He had to lean on us. On Alfred. On me. I moved back into the manor for a few weeks. Not as a hero, but as a son. We talked. Really talked. About his parents, about my parents, about the weight of the cowl. He apologized for Zur-En-Arrh, for the monster he had built inside himself. "I was so afraid of failing you all," he confessed one night, his voice quiet, "that I became the very thing that could destroy you." "You didn't," I said, "because we didn't let you. That's what family is for." I returned to Blüdhaven, changed yet again. The battle for Bruce's soul had been a different kind of war, one that reaffirmed the core truth I had learned against the absence. Connection is everything. Barbara and I found that permanent home, a small, secure loft with a view of both our cities. It wasn't a fortress or a clock tower, it was just an apartment. Our apartment. The future, once a distant, abstract concept, now felt tangible. I stood on my rooftop in Blüdhaven, the city's chaotic symphony rising to meet me. I had faced cosmic nihilism and my father's inner demon, and I had won both fights, not with superior force, but with the stubborn, illogical power of hope and love. The boy who fell was long gone. The man who stood here now knew the true nature of flight. It wasn't about defying gravity. It was about knowing that even if you fall, there are hands waiting to catch you. I took a running start and leaped, a blue and black streak against the city lights, soaring into the endless, hopeful night. The peace that followed felt earned. It was a deep, structural calm, not just the absence of a crisis. Bruce was healing, slowly. Our relationship had been reforged in the fire of his own mind, stronger and more honest than ever before. In Blüdhaven, the systemic work was paying off. Crime was down, community trust was up. For the first time, it felt like I wasn't just holding back the tide, but actually reclaiming land from the ocean. Barbara and I settled into our new life with a sense of wonder. grocery shopping, arguing over what to stream, lazy Sunday mornings. These were victories as significant as any rooftop brawl. I even started thinking about the future in concrete terms. Maybe I couldn't do this forever. Maybe there was a life after the mask. The thought, which once would have terrified me, now felt like a quiet, hopeful promise. The threat, when it came, was so personal it felt like a violation. It didn't start with a bang, but with a whisper. A name from a past I thought I'd buried. Dr. Simon Hurt. He wasn't a costumed rogue. He was a historian, a psychologist, a man who claimed to be the devil himself, and he had a theory about the Wayne family that was more terrifying than any of Ra's al Ghul's schemes. He surfaced in the academic underworld, publishing a dense, esoteric treatise that posited a shocking idea that the Wayne family was cursed. That Thomas and Martha Wayne's murder wasn't a random act of violence, but a ritualistic sacrifice, part of a dark bargain for power that stretched back generations. He claimed Bruce wasn't a hero, but the unwitting vessel for an ancient, malevolent force. It was absurd, Gothic nonsense, but Hurt was a master manipulator, and he knew how to plant a seed of doubt in fertile soil. Hurt's campaign was psychological warfare. He didn't attack Batman, he attacked Bruce Wayne's legacy. He used his academic credentials to gain airtime on sensationalist news channels, always speaking in calm, measured tones that made his insane claims sound reasonable. "Why does tragedy follow this family?" he'd ask. "Why does a man dress as a bat to fight crime? These are not the actions of a well-adjusted philanthropist. These are the symptoms of a deep, spiritual sickness passed down through the bloodline." He dug up old duct-taped photos of Thomas Wayne with unsavory characters, spread rumors about Martha's family history of mental illness. He was systematically dismantling the myth of the noble Waynes and replacing it with a narrative of corruption and madness. The public, always hungry for scandal, began to listen. Bruce's corporate stock dipped. The Wayne Foundation saw donors pull out. The seed was sprouting. The attack became more direct. Hurt somehow gained access to the Batcave's lowest-level archives, things even I didn't know existed. He began leaking them. Not battle plans, but Bruce's personal journals from his early, darkest years. Pages filled with paranoid ramblings, detailed psychological self-assessments, and his early, brutal theories on criminology. They were the raw, unfiltered thoughts of a traumatized young man taken completely out of context. The media frenzy was instantaneous. "Batman's dangerous mind," the headlines screamed. Commissioner Gordon was forced to publicly distance the GCPD from Batman. The city looked at its dark guardian and saw a lunatic. Bruce retreated into a cold, silent fury. He was being tried in the court of public opinion for the crime of his own pain. We were losing the one thing he had fought so hard to build, the symbol. We tracked Hurt to a forgotten Wayne Enterprises subsidiary, a defunct psychiatric institute called Arkham Manor. The irony was bitter. The place was a decaying monument to Gothic horror. Inside, we found his operation. It wasn't an army. It was a shrine. The walls were covered in a sprawling, insane genealogy linking the Waynes to every major tragedy in Gotham's history. Hurt was there, a gaunt, ascetic-looking man with eyes that held a terrifying emptiness. "Richard Grayson," he said, his voice like dry leaves. "The adopted son, the cuckoo in the nest. Do you feel the corruption in your blood yet?" He didn't fight. He just talked. He spewed his poisonous history, trying to get inside my head, to make me doubt everything I knew about Bruce, about myself. "He didn't save you, boy. He recruited you. Another soul for the sacrificial altar." I wanted to hit him. I wanted to wipe that smug, knowing look off his face. But I remembered my fight with the absence. You can't fight a bad idea with fists. The real battle wasn't in the manor, it was on the airwaves. Hurt had a dead man's switch. If he didn't check in, a final damning revelation would be broadcast to the world. That Thomas Wayne was part of a secret society called the Black Glove, and that he had ordered his own death as the ultimate act of the ritual. It was a lie, of course. A brilliant, horrific lie that would destroy Bruce completely. We had to prove it was a forgery, not with violence, but with truth. While Batman contained Hurt, Oracle and I went to war in the digital and historical realms. It was a race against time. Barbara worked her magic, tracing the digital footprint of the document. I, using every lesson Bruce ever taught me about detective work, delved into the physical evidence. I tracked down the paper, the ink, the typewriter used. We had to prove the document was a modern creation. The key was in the paper. Hurt had been meticulous, using vintage materials. But he'd made one mistake. He'd used a specific brand of binding glue that contained a chemical compound not invented until 5 years after Thomas Wayne's death. It was a tiny, almost invisible flaw, but it was enough. As Hurt's dead man's switch timer counted down to 0, we launched our counter-offensive. Barbara released our evidence to every major news outlet simultaneously. I stood beside Bruce Wayne as he gave a live, televised press conference. He didn't deny the pain in the journals. He owned it. "These are the writings of a boy who watched his parents murdered," he said, his voice raw with the emotion he rarely showed the public. "They are a testament to grief, not to madness. And this," he held up the analysis of the forged document, "is the work of a monster who preys on grief. My parents were victims. They were good people, and I will not let their memory be desecrated." It was the most human the world had ever seen Bruce Wayne. And humanity in that moment was the most powerful weapon we had. The tide turned. The public, seeing the evidence and Bruce's vulnerability, rallied behind him. The narrative of the cursed Wayne family collapsed under the weight of its own absurdity. Simon Hurt was taken into custody, not by Batman, but by federal authorities for fraud, forgery, and psychological abuse. He went quietly, a faint, mocking smile on his lips, as if he had still won some deeper, more philosophical victory. In the aftermath, Bruce was quiet. The attack had left a different kind of scar. It had forced him to confront his legacy, not as a vigilante, but as a man. We stood in the quiet of the Batcave, the hum of the computer the only sound. "He was wrong about everything," Bruce said finally. "But he was right about one thing, the mission. It can become a cage, a different kind of ritual." He looked at me. "You've always known that, better than I have." A few weeks later, Bruce called a rare, full family meeting. He stood before us, me, Barbara, Tim, Damien, Alfred, even Cassandra Cain. "The mission will continue," he said. "Gotham will always need Batman, but Batman cannot be this." He gestured to the cave, to the isolation. "Hurt attacked the idea of family. Our strength was that we proved him wrong. From now on, that is our foundation, not just in the field, but in our lives." It was a seismic shift. He was officially, formally recognizing the Bat family not as soldiers, but as a family. He delegated more authority, trusted our judgment implicitly. He started making time for things that weren't the mission. The change in him was subtle, but profound. The weight he had carried alone for so long was finally, truly, shared. I sit now on the rooftop of our Blue apartment, Barbara's hand in mine. The city is quiet tonight. The wars, against nihilism, against inner demons, against poisoned legacies, feel distant. I am Dick Grayson, the boy who fell and learned to fly, the hero who argued with the void and won, the son who fought his father's demons and brought him home, the man who loves Barbara Gordon. My story is not one of tragedy, but of choice. At every crossroad, I chose to hope. I chose to love. I chose to build, not just break. The shadows are deep, and the fight is never over. But I am not afraid of the dark. I know its shape, and I know that within it there are always hands to catch you, voices to guide you, and love to light the way. I look at Barbara, at the city we protect, at the family I call my own. The story isn't over. It's just beginning, and I can't wait to see what happens next.